Slew of questions to talk to you about.
I'm going to be serving as Mayor Pro Tem tonight in the absence of Mayor Gertz. And I want to welcome our visitors, and we got a choir back here, and they're ready to sing. And those that are watching for our August the 10th work session. Now, I've already been instructed by several people that we're not going to be here all night. So Tuesday, we had a great meeting. It was very informative. And I don't expect anything less tonight. The only difference is on Tuesday, we only have only two presentations, and tonight we have 4. So I'm going to ask our presenters, I know y'all have really spent a lot of time with your PowerPoints and who's going to say what, but this commission is very good at asking questions and having discussion. So I'm going to ask that our presenters be mindful of time. Maybe we'll try 30 minutes apiece, since we have 4. 15 minutes for your presentation and 15 minutes for questions and answers. If that don't work, we'll try something else. So with that, we're going to move on. And our first presentation is going to be the Affordable Housing Investment Strategy. And our Housing and Community Development Director, Roderick Wallace, is going to present. And we're going to turn it over to you, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, everyone. As Commissioner said, this evening we're going to share with you some yeoman work that's been done around the Affordable Housing Investment Strategy. We have a presentation from our HR&A, our strategic partners, and the consultants who've kind of led this effort. I also would like to introduce you to one of our teammates, Alejandra Cava, and she'll be kind of facilitating through. Vidi, are you ready?
Yes, thanks, Roderick. Can you hear me fine?
You're good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will just say that we can't hear you all very well, so if you do say something and you don't respond, that's why. But thanks everyone. Thanks for having us here. As Roderick said, we'll be walking you through at a very high level the affordable housing investment strategy that we've put together over the last several months. And I believe you have all received and maybe even had a chance to go through the detailed report. So this is really a summary of the key points from that report. So in terms of agenda, what we're going to go through today is start with a broad overview of the process we followed, go through the recommendations, and then launch and get into discussion. I think someone mentioned earlier, there's going to be questions. We're happy to take questions. Please feel free to stop us while we're going through it, and we can discuss as we go along. And we don't have to retain all the questions right for the end. So we started the process back in November, working with the HCD staff, where we first, obviously, we sort of decided upon together what the strategy or the approach is to the project. We spent a couple of months after that looking at the housing needs in Athens-Clarke County and doing a deep dive into the market conditions, the systems, the stakeholders, and really kind of diagnosing and coming out with what the key challenges in the housing market in Athens-Clarke County. Following which, we spent another few months on developing potential housing tools to address these key challenges. Again, working with the HCD team, with the advisory committee on identifying what are the priority housing tools that ACC Gov should be implementing and is going to be able to implement, and putting that, developing the draft housing strategy around that, which, like I said, I believe has been shared with all of you. And of course, we're here today discussing that with you. And then there's public process comment period ongoing, being led by the HCD team, which of course, as we understand, will culminate in a vote next month. And throughout this process, we've been working with stakeholders, community groups to ground truth our findings and our secondary data. So from there, so just to give you an overview, so to begin with, 3 key housing challenges that we identified in the market, which of course we understand, this is not necessarily new to any of you, but to center our analysis, the first of which was is that ACC has a modest affordable housing delivery system. And what we mean by that is limited public funding. ACC Gov operates all of its programs using federal funding, annual federal funding allocations, and of course in recent years, the COVID funds that are one time and not annual funding. So we see that there's about $1.7 million on average over the last 4 to 5 years in federal funding. The second key challenge that we found was the lack of quality, affordable rental homes, and this stems in large part directly from the limited funding available and has resulted in less than 60 subsidized rental units being built since 2020. And finally, on the home ownership side, we see this manifesting in a very low home ownership rate in Athens-Clarke County. Even when we exclude students, we find that there's the home ownership rate is 47% compared to 64% in the state and the country. So really taking these 3 housing needs, like I said, that's what became the center point for us to anchor on in terms of developing the recommendations for the housing strategy. So next slide, please. Yeah. So centering around those 3 key challenges, our recommendations are, the first and foremost recommendation is, to identify ongoing local public funding. And, of course, funding is important. And as we go through, you'll see, we don't mean to just say that ACC Gov should be just putting out tons of money to address this issue, but it's really about how do you even leverage that local funding and bring in other federal funding, private sources, philanthropic sources, things like that, and to maximize the impact of local dollars, and therefore build capacity in the ecosystem in general. The second recommendation revolves around addressing the rental affordability challenge, and that it's really 2 sides of the coin. On the one side, of course, is developing more subsidized rental housing, but at the same time, also looking at your existing affordable rental housing stock and, developing programs to preserve that stock and preserve that existing affordability from being lost. And finally, on the home ownership side, similar to the rental affordability side, we're talking about increasing access for new homeowners, but also protecting existing homeowners, helping them make repairs, developing programs, we'll talk about it, to repair their homes, age in place, and build wealth. Next slide, please. So when we started looking at those 3 recommendations, we started looking at what are the different types of tools, and they really fall under these 3 categories of land use subsidy and tenants' rights. And the reason why subsidy is called out here is, when we look at Georgia law, we see that there's only so much that can be done on the tenants' rights fronts as well as land use. That's not to say that, ACC Gov or other governments in the state are not deploying land use tools. We know ACC Gov, for instance, already has a voluntary inclusionary zoning program as well. But we do think that, and you'll see that in our recommendations, that of all the 3 types of tools, subsidy is likely to be the most effective in addressing these challenges and helping meet the stated goals. So from there, we won't go through all of this, but the slide is in here to, just sort of say, hey, these are all of our specific tools and actions when we think about those three key recommendation areas. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. There's 13 of them. Of course, we don't think it's advisable to move on all of them at the same time. And we're not going to discuss all of them today except the bolded ones, just because we think those are the most important, and some of which the ACC Gov is already moving on, and some of which, the others of which we think they should move on in the near term. So as we were going through these tools, we started to categorize them, next slide please, into, we started to prioritize which ones to move on. And like I said, ACC Gov is already moving on to using ARPA funds that they have currently, the down payment assistance program and the owner-occupied repair program. And the key recommendation of this plan is really to establish that local housing fund. And that's the very first and foremost step. And once that is done, that'll actually set the government up to address all of the other tools, to start deploying the other tools as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, like I said, the foremost recommendation is to establish a local housing fund, which can help create and preserve affordable homes, both for renters and for homeowners, new as well as existing. And we know that this is not the first time that this recommendation has come to the table, and there are state laws around, restrictions around dedicating a specific tax or revenue source to fund it. That said, we did look into a couple of other local housing funds in the state as well, and we'll talk about one of them shortly. But we did, we want to bring this up as the foremost question to answer that all of you will need to answer when you start thinking about setting up the local housing fund, is what are those potential new sources of funding? And, that could, include allocating existing dollars from the general budget. It could include, increasing an existing tax, allocating non-tax-based revenue, expanding the use of tax allocation districts, which of course ACC Gov is already doing, leveraging philanthropic funding. And we recognize that for all of these, there needs to be more research into what is the legal compliance, what is the scale of available funding, and is it feasible at all for ACC Gov to do this? And like I said, we did look at other jurisdictions as well. So one of the ones that came up is the Savannah Affordable Housing Fund, which was set up in 2012. And what we see is, it started pretty modestly, and it started with actually dedicating about $150,000 per year from the city's general fund, and has recently gone up to about $500,000 per year. And like I was saying previously, the goal of the local housing fund is not just, it's obviously to sort of kickstart the process, but really leveraging other sources. And when we look at the Savannah Housing Fund, between 2012 and 2021, they have been able to leverage the local funding put in about 15 times. What we generally find looking at local housing funds across the country is that they leverage up to 10x. In fact, even the plan going forward for the Savannah Affordable Housing Fund anticipates about a 10x leverage rate. And that includes LIHTC, state financing, private financing, CDFI, and philanthropic money as well. So just putting that together and working with different stakeholders helps leverage the local funding several times over. Next slide, please. And as an example, as an illustrative example, if we talk about, if we look at an annual commitment of $5 million in the local housing fund, we assume about 1.4 million of it coming from federal sources and the remaining from local funding. We think that we anticipate, depending on the programs that ACC Gov includes or decides to fund through the local housing fund, that you might be able to triple the production of affordable homes, production and preservation of affordable homes to around 150 each year. And as an example, this would include gap financing for LIHTC, single family and for owner on the rental side. And on the home ownership side, it would include down payment assistance for new homeowners and owner occupied repair assistance for existing homeowners. Next slide, please. And so in terms of setting it up, what we think the immediate steps, of course, the very first step would be to adopt the recommendation and start developing an implementation plan and very quickly move into, like I said previously, identifying what the revenue sources are and advancing legislation to identify those possible local funding sources. And in 2024, developing those governance policies, identifying what are the policy goals, what is going to be the process for evaluating, for ranking projects, and then launching the local housing fund, begin awarding funds through a competitive process by the end of the year next year. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to my colleague, Austin, to walk you through the rest of the recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Betty. So right now, we want to emphasize that for recommendations 2 and 3 to happen, that we really believe that recommendation 1 needs to be the priority. It's kind of the foundation of the entire strategy, and it will help support several of the tools that are found in recommendations 2 and 3. But when we look at recommendation 2, it's focused on building and preserving quality, affordable rental homes and identifying strategies to keep and preserve those homes. And if we go to the next slide, we'll get into the overview of those 3 tools, which are supporting LIHTC projects, advancing the voluntary inclusionary zoning policy, and exploring an acquisition strike fund. And we'll get more into detail with each of these in the upcoming slides, but everything is framed around increasing the amount of rental homes in Athens-Clarke County. So the low-income housing tax credit, many of you may already be familiar with it. It's the LIHTC program, and it's the largest source of funding for affordable housing in the country. Most projects that have affordable housing in them are using low-income housing tax credits, and Athens-Clarke County has already done this. You have used LIHTC to support redevelopment of public housing. There have been some LIHTC exclusive developments happen in Athens-Clarke County, and ACC Gov has already had has a precedent of providing gap financing for LIHTC projects. What we're recommending is that this becomes an annual and formalized process that happens on a recurring basis and leverages dollars from the local housing fund so that developers of LIHTC units can predict that there will be gap financing available to them on an annual basis. And as a part of this process, you all will create a set of underwriting guidelines that dictates like the affordability mix that these projects would have, the scoring criteria for deciding which projects qualify for funding, and sets a cap on the amount of funding that can be provided for individual projects. Additionally, there's some other things you all can do to support LIHTC projects, such as looking at your development approvals process and your just overall zoning map and your zoning rules to ensure that they are allowing LIHTC development to happen in a timely manner. LIHTC projects need to have their zoning in place before they submit their application, so making sure they've made it through the approvals process in a timely manner is very important. And Athens-Clarke County can also look at leveraging public land to support LIHTC projects. Public land can be one of the largest costs for LIHTC projects, and so finding ways to use public land to support those projects can be very helpful. And then to support the competitive process for funding, ACC government staff will need to build underwriting capacity to be able to assess proposals and ensure public dollars are being used at the highest and best use. If we look at the next slide, we can look at an example of a LIHTC project that has received gap financing. This project is in the Atlanta metro region. And so while it's a slightly different market, it does demonstrate how gap financing can be very vital for projects. So this is a project that hasn't been built yet. It is currently awaiting to receive its LIHTC award. And in this case, Invest Atlanta, which is an organization in the Atlanta metro region that provides a lot of funding for affordable housing, they provided about $1.5 million for gap financing. And so they only paid $14,000 per unit for a project where the total cost was $313,000 per unit, which meant that they were able to leverage their money by 22 times. And this is incredibly vital because a project like this is maxing out the amount of LIHTC money it can get. It's maxing out the amount of financing it can get through a traditional bank. And it's also maxing out the amount of money that the developer is putting up of their own cash. And sometimes that's just not enough for affordable housing because of how costly it can be. And so local governments can play a big role in filling that gap. And it also helps increase their score on LIHTC projects. If we look at the impact for LIHTC projects, if ACC Gov were to commit a $2 million annual commitment for LIHTC projects, this could support between 40 to 50 new affordable rental homes every year. This is assuming a per unit cost of about $40,000 to $50,000 because that's what has been precedent in Clarke County to date. But over time, as the LIHTC market matures, we believe this amount can be reduced to more like $20,000 to $30,000 per unit. We move to the next recommendation. This is just highlighting you all have a voluntary inclusionary zoning policy already, which is really good. It's ahead of what many local governments have been doing. And we want to emphasize that that policy needs to continue to be monitored and assessed to make sure that it is being its most effective. The market has changed a lot in the past 3 years. Interest rates have gone very high. Construction costs have been very high. And so making sure that the policy is still working given the new development context is important. There's also a need to ensure that the policy works for both rental and for sale housing. And so we recommend that there's a policy specifically for sale housing. And then we also discuss how best practice is to have an inclusionary zoning manual that kind of outlines the process guidelines and approvals processes for the inclusionary zoning program. On the next slide, we look at kind of like our 4 tenets that we look at when we think about inclusionary zoning policies. And as mentioned, Athens-Clarke County already has much of this. You already have figured out the requirements with the affordability levels, the geographies, the incentive structures, and you have administrative processes laid out in the ordinance itself. And we would recommend that you all create just an inclusionary zoning manual that takes all of those resources, puts it in one place, and puts it in easier to read terminology so anybody can pick it up and easily utilize it. And then the table at the bottom just demonstrates kind of the trade-off between 60% and 80% units and shows like the amount of rent loss that a developer would take for providing 60 and 80% units. And this is just to emphasize one piece of analysis you all could explore as you assess the policy to understand like what is the benefit or the cost to developers doing this policy and how do we offset that cost with the incentives we're providing. So next we'll talk through the acquisition strike fund. This is just all about preserving existing rental homes that are affordable. There are a lot of rental homes in Athens that are not affordable because they receive public funding or because there's an affordability covenant on them that makes them income restricted, but they're affordable because they're older units, maybe they're been run down, and because of that, they are naturally cheaper. So they're market rate, but they are at affordable rents, and they're not mandated to remain affordable. And so because of this, they are vulnerable to developers coming in, purchasing them, increasing rents, making improvements, and through that process, displacing residents. And so what we're recommending is that you all develop a fund to purchase these structures and put a regulatory covenant on them to ensure they remain affordable in the long term. And then here we just lay out the steps that it would take to do this. You need to evaluate the funding that you would want for establishing the strike fund and determine policy goals. You'd want to engage philanthropic funders so that ACC Gov isn't the only one funding this program. And you need to identify lending partners who could help facilitate the program. On the next slide, we look at an example of how this program works. So there are three kind of key steps. First off, a developer would identify an affordable housing opportunity, and then they would approach whoever is running this strike fund and they would apply for funding. When they purchase the fund, they would use some of the funds from the acquisition strike fund to support the acquisition of that structure. And then over a period of 5 years, they would repay that loan. It would revolve back into this fund, and the process would kind of continue. And that's an important thing to consider about the strike fund is it's a revolving fund, and so there's a one-time upfront investment, and then after that, after loans get made and then they get repaid, and so there's not a need to kind of have this ongoing funding unless you decide like you just want to have more money in the fund. And then here we're looking at an example fund from another jurisdiction. Now, this is the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, so it's worth noting this is a statewide fund, so that's part of the reason the fund is so large. But it does leverage public funding to attract philanthropic and private bank capital to support local housing priorities. And so here we see that the Greater Minnesota Fund is able to leverage 3 times the amount of public investment with that philanthropic and private funding. So the government only provided $8 million of funding, but they were able to have an overall fund of $32.5 million to support the preservation of existing homes. And then now if we'll go to the project level on this slide and look at how this works for a specific project. And so here we can see with this graphic on the right how the fund will provide a loan that kind of closes the gap. And so again, the developer is still expected to go get a first mortgage, a senior loan, and that'll account for a good portion of the money to purchase the property. And the developer would also still be expected to put up some of their own money to purchase the property. And then this fund would just help serve the role to fill in the gap between whatever's left over between the amount of money they have and the amount it costs to purchase the property. So now we'll dive into our recommendations on home ownership, and we're going to kind of move through these quickly because you all are already doing this. But the two we really want to focus on are down payment assistance and owner-occupied repair. If we go to the next slide, we get just a brief overview of those. The point behind these programs is to support existing and potential low to moderate income homeowners in Athens-Clarke County. This is a national phenomenon, but it's happening in Athens-Clarke County too. Like over the past several years, it has become a lot harder to attain home ownership, particularly for low and moderate income households. On the next slide, we'll look at the down payment assistance program. That's first off worth noting again, like there are organizations in Athens-Clarke County who are already doing this. And what we're wanting to highlight is that if ACC Gov were to identify additional funding for down payment assistance, it's going to increase the impact of these existing programs. There are also ways that ACC government can deploy strategies to expand access to mortgages for low-income households, such as by developing local mortgage pools, which puts multiple mortgages into a shared pool and allows the risk to be spread across multiple loans. This is also a way that you can help address racial inequities in access to mortgages. That's one of a prominent problem across the country, but also in Athens-Clarke County, where Black households are disproportionately denied for mortgages compared to white households. And so by pooling mortgages together, it can help spread the risk and allow increased home ownership access for low-income households. On the next slide, we look at an example of how the down payment assistance can work. And the thing that we want to emphasize here is that while down payment assistance is helpful, it can only go so far if there are homes available that are affordable to the households using the program. So right now, the median house price in Athens-Clarke County is about $290,000. As it currently stands, that is too expensive for a household at 80% of area median income or making $65,000 a year to afford. And so those households that can leverage existing down payment assistance programs, such as the DCA DREAM program that's provided by the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, and then other local down payment assistance programs, that they could still use additional down payment assistance to close the rest of that gap, so that they can afford this $290,000 home. And a $1 million annual commitment from Athens-Clarke County government could support 30 to 35 new homeowners every year. The last tool we're highlighting tonight is the owner-occupied repair program. And again, this is something that Athens-Clarke County is already doing. We believe that you all can enhance this program to ensure it continues to help low-income and older homeowners remain in their home. The cost of upkeep can be a large barrier for families maintaining home ownership over time. And so we just are emphasizing that by expanding this program and identifying additional funding sources, ACC Gov can help homeowners remain in their home. And then the next slide just talks about how this program currently works. So most common right now is for households to receive about a $5,000 grant, which allows for kind of small interior and exterior improvements, which is helpful. However, a lot of homes are not able to meet all of the needs that they have to remain livable long-term, such as roof repairs, subfloor replacements, and other needs. And so one of our recommendations is to allow for grants up to $10,000 to allow for kind of larger scale projects that help homes remain habitable over time. And with that, we'll turn to discussion and answer any questions you all have.
I've got just a few comments, I guess. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you.
Let's do this. Is everybody else thinking that they want to ask some questions too?
Yeah.
I mean, there may be some questions that come out of
that's
this.
fine. Go for it.
So I guess I was just looking at the presentation, and a lot of this, it struck me, I was hoping to see something new that we haven't talked about or thought about. Maybe the strike fund is something new that looks at existing homes to help. But, I didn't really see, I mean, we've worked with planning department and our low-income tax credit folks. I remember Rick Parker standing here several times talking about the low-income tax credit and how he's worked with our planning department on making some of the adjustments that are needed and some of the adjustments that he was asking us to do as far as funding and stuff like that goes. So we've done that. We've got an affordable housing fund set up. And I guess what I'm trying to say, it all does boil down to money. And the thing that, I didn't see in here was perhaps like some incentives. Are there incentives where we've got, I don't know how many permits Brad can tell us when we talk about the land use plan, but y'all see a lot of the multifamily housing that's being built around town. And that means that there's other multifamily housing that's older, but it's probably needs a little bit of improvement that may move towards being affordable or more affordable to people as more housing stock in the multifamily comes available. So I guess I'm making a point here. Maybe it's in the report about the housing that's coming online. I mean, we just passed one of our TADs is going to have 100 units in it come in a few years. So I don't want us to leave here with the impression that we haven't been looking at things to do. But I also want us to leave here with the impression that I understand we need to do more, but more could come in the result of looking at incentives for property owners to redevelop some of their property or or some of these older properties to become affordable. Maybe we look at some property tax incentive or some property tax abatement to help with those efforts. So anyway, I appreciate the discussion, but those are just my thoughts. I guess there is no question in there.
No, there was
So-
no, well, no.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are we going to go with Carol and Jesse?
Okay, one of the things I would say, building on what Commissioner Hamby says here, is it does come down to a question of money and what our local government is willing to contribute. I mean, I think there's also one thing that didn't get a lot of attention was the zoning changes that could allow some more development, different kinds of development in different places that we've been talking about. But the question, oh man, what was that big thought I had there? Oh, on the money. Oh, one of the things that I need that wasn't in here, it may be in the bigger report that I have, and it may be in the agenda report. If we decide to move forward and contribute to something along this kind of funding or some other things, I didn't see the numbers exactly in here about how many housing units we will need over a certain amount of time. And so, you know, in the beginning, it said that we have 47% homeowners in this county compared to 64%. And in terms of a funding source, a big funding source is from property taxes. But those are the people who already have the homes. So, one, I need to, and those are the people who come and make comments as well, and reach out. I need to know the extent of the numbers that we need to be adding in over the next 10 years as well. And something that actually perhaps also lays out the effects of not having this housing and how it affects the larger community and the person who lives in my neighborhood and has that median income house right now, so that we can persuade if it's possible, or if we want to, the community that this is something that is essential and urgent for us to move forward on this. The other thing I think might have been in here as well, when you were talking about the housing, and I saw it in here, was the effect of the UGA housing needs over the next 10 years. I've seen some reference to 10,000 more students, and I saw something in the bigger report that refers to, you know, how much more profitable it is to build units where they're all master bedrooms with separate bathrooms for students that could be rented out individually. Someone asked me about the Lexington Road, the big project going up on Lexington Road with some of the affordable or workforce housing in the front, but those other units behind are all set up for students. So what can we do to incentivize? You know, obviously, the people who are building the student housing are incentivized, but what can we be doing to incentivize housing that isn't for students? So these are solutions, but I also need some of those factual things to explain to the people who are living in my district and paying the property taxes, why this is so urgent to them as well.
Jesse?
Yeah, two things, broadly speaking, I wanted to touch on. One, you know, the local housing fund, to me, seems like a new thing, at least insofar as establishing this to serve the purposes that we're talking about it serving. And as the presenter pointed out, it's kind of the basis for us really being able to achieve most of the subsequent goals. So I'm just curious if someone on staff or maybe someone from HR&A can just elaborate a bit on what about this local housing fund is new and distinct from what we've been doing to date? And then after that, I have one other thing.
Staff?
Maybe is that something you can speak on kind of explaining how is this housing fund different from what we already have, the one that Athens Housing Authority, for example, is currently contributing on? Are you able to hear us?
And that we put $40 million of SPLOST dollars into for the housing.
sorry.
Never mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the question. And so I think there's a few key differences when we think about the local housing fund versus what ACC Gov, what HCD is already doing. And we talked about this a little bit in the report, is the pilot payments that are coming in through the Athens Housing Authority. I think one key difference is the scale of it. For sure, is, you know, at present, the funding that ACC Gov is working with is, like I said, primarily federal funding and some funding that goes into the pilot payments from the Athens Housing Authority. But it's really not enough to meet the scale of the need out there right now, whether it's for renters or homeowners, new or existing. The second piece of it is when we think about a local housing fund, it's it's consistent. That's the key. Like the recurring funding piece of it is really the key piece of it. And so the recommendation that we're making here is to identify what could be some recurring local sources of funding that the government can count on every single year. And it may not be a very large amount to begin with. I mean, we look at the Savannah example as well, but just making sure that there is that consistent source, and therefore and this leads to the third point is one, having consistent sources of funding, and two, having adequate funding really allows both ACC Gov as well as all of its partners delivering on affordable housing programs to plan around that. And that in turn obviously leads to more production and higher capacity in the ecosystem in general.
Okay. Just,
Thanks.
Commissioner Hall, before you ask your next question, I do believe that the presenter mentioned the pilot fund, and for those who do not know what that is, that the Athens Housing Authority does not do, could you just, in one word, just talk about that? Pay in lieu of taxes?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So that is an existing fund, and please jump in if I miss any details. That's an existing fund that's Athens Housing Authority has been contributing about 115,000 or so a year. Historically, that fund has been accessed by the Athens Housing Authority to provide gap financing for their various projects. So as far as I understand that, they have been really the only source of funding, if you will, to that fund, and also the only entity that has so far accessed it. But I will let Manager Blink.
No, I think that's all correct. There may have been one other allocation of those funds to someone else, if I'm remembering over the last so many years. But yeah, that was established. At the time, y'all might remember, I think some folks were kind of mistakenly labeling it as a trust fund. Of course, that's not exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a small fund that has not grown because it's constantly accessed for Columbia Brookside, for Bethel. But yeah, that is an existing fund.
Okay.
I think it's called Special Revenue Fund for Housing.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hall, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so just the other thing I wanted to touch upon, and thanks for elaborating on that a bit. I and Mayor Pro Tem Thornton and Mayor Gertz have been also in these GIC, the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing meetings that have been kind of the advisory body for this report coming to date. The other thing that has stuck out to me in this is that we're getting this month, and then next month we're going to look at the homelessness strategic plan, and we've talked a lot about how these two are going to talk to each other. In my mind, I'll just throw out there now that I would prefer that this body maybe hold on final adoption of this until we get the homelessness one too, so we can adopt them at the same time. But that's not something we need to figure out tonight. I did want to ask our staff to maybe speak briefly to how these two plans will talk to each other. And I'm especially thinking about, this is one example, so maybe this doesn't have to be the only one that you'd want to speak to, but if we're going to establish this local housing fund and put more money up front to leverage to get this LIHTC funding, is there a way that we can ensure that those projects that we fund are, if not entirely, at least partially earmarked for supportive housing to kind of meet what I'm assuming is going to be one of the top recommendations of the homelessness strategic plan, which is to increase our stock of supportive housing stock. So can you just speak to how they might talk to each other, how these go together?
Yeah, so of course, very intertwined issues, housing and homelessness. And so in your agenda packet, you will see a document that sort of outlines those points of connection between the two plans. So yes, for example, this housing plan does have this local housing fund. It's much more, this one is much more focused on the development and perhaps the rehab of units. There's nothing, and I don't believe BD will disagree with me, that says that we wouldn't be able to make the policy say we could build permanent supportive housing with this, right? At the end of the day, it's still housing for a very low income household. So that's a policy question, and I'm not sure, I don't think HRNA would disagree with that. On the homelessness plan, we do have what do we call it? We called it a support fund, essentially. It's more of a flexible fund, and I believe this body approved $300,000 of ARPA funds as part of the FY24 budget. And that one, for example, is meant to be much more if households need an extra month of rent, or their car broke down and that's why they're missing work and they're at risk of losing housing. So there's some connections there. Other points of connections between the plans is landlord engagement, right? A lot of the, both on the housing side, how do we work better as a local government with service providers and landlords to make sure that they have what they need to help us keep affordable housing? On the homelessness side of things, how can service providers work better with landlords to help place their clients who might have otherwise been maybe no longer accepting Section 8 vouchers and so on. So there's a lot of points of connections. I could take a whole meeting on that, but you'll see that in your agenda report, that document. Is that?
Commissioner Taylor, Commissioner Link, Commissioner Fisher.
So how does code enforcement work in all of this? Because we do have houses that people are living in right now, and code enforcement isn't doing anything. So within this, like what capacity is code enforcement going to be involved? Like I know we said we're going to rehab houses that need, but are you working with code enforcement? Were they involved?
That's a great question. So I do believe we can certainly bring code enforcement into this conversation. And, I think, to my knowledge, that they've been working pretty hard. However, if there are some very specific structures, you can please let us know.
Commissioner Link.
So Commissioner Myers started to touch on some of this, but the elephant in the room is that we have a significant portion of our population that's fairly wealthy transient, and they're putting pressure on this market. I'm talking about UGA students, and it's an ever-growing population. And I'm just concerned about the feasibility of this strike fund where we might acquire properties. I don't know how many property owners would be willing to sell to the local government for a price that would be affordable to the local government to maintain affordable housing when they have this, ready population, ready and eager to pay top dollar. And, I look at the AMI numbers too, and the problem goes beyond student wealth. It's about employee wealth. Like very few UGA employees make anywhere near that median income. So I really think that we need to have a discussion with our state legislators, the Board of Regents. If we're going to start this strike fund, we need to get some money from the state to offset the impact that the University of Georgia is having on our housing market.
I think the next speaker was Commissioner Fisher, and then I think Commissioner Wright.
Sort of to follow up on Commissioner Link's question, I'm a little bit disappointed that you all did not consider us being a college community and what that impact would be on housing and even on rent. As you know, we don't have rent control in this state, so it's going to be sort of hard for us to come up with these type of funding to try to keep rent at a level that people can afford. And then even on the housing issue, who are we trying to target from a housing standpoint? I like the fact that we want to get housing where people can afford to have housing and also to build wealth. And that's how people build wealth and generational wealth. So I'm disappointed that we didn't take a look at maybe some other college towns and how this may impact from a housing perspective. So you talk about Atlanta, you talk about Savannah, but total truth is different. And like Commissioner Link said, UGA owns 50% of the land in here, in this community. And we got to figure out, what land are we going to use in order, if we want to build affordable housing in this community. And again, we're the smallest geographic area in this state. So we got to be realistic for how we're going to look at housing and what that's going to look like over the next 10 years. So that's food for thought. I just thought that we should do some comparisons.
So great point, Commissioner Fisher, and I also heard something similar from Commissioner Hamby. So one strategy that's tailored to us being a college town is the strike fund. The strike fund will allow us to go purchase property that's naturally occurring, so older student housing. So one thing that a college town does have is an abundance of student housing. So if we're able to go purchase older student housing and turn it to affordable housing preservation, that'd be one of the strategies that we should proceed with.
Well, and I think my point was, you know, in looking at the strike fund, but also look at some sort of incentive that we can offer these owners of these older affordable housing units to turn them into affordability.
Certainly.
I think, Commissioner, but Assistant Manager Jones, before you sit down, I know I'm supposed to be presiding and probably not have no comment, but we're talking about UGA land and other parcels of land. I would have liked to seen something about the land that the local government already owns as a conversation piece. So it's not what everybody else owns. We own land also. So with that, Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, and I know that people immediately think that the only college students we have are UGA, but all of the universities, they're not the only university or university students in our community. And let's not forget, all schools are tax exempt from property taxes, all churches, both the hospitals. So it's not just one, if you want to call it an elephant in the room, there's several. But that, I just wanted to highlight that. But I do like the discussions you're talking about with the partnerships. I think that we could do some outreach for people who do have property and how you get to be a landlord of someone with a voucher. My sister did that in Fort Collins. It took 2 months for her through that process. So I think that there are partners that could happen. And at one of my conferences this summer, I guess it was GMA, the point was the most affordable housing that we have are the ones that currently exist. And there's quality to be had there. And if we look back at some of the earlier 50s, 70s student housing, you know, and I appreciate us, we have to process what we're learning into our, what can be effective here. And I think there are clearly bits and pieces of that too. But we still have more learning to do as well as prioritizing what can be the most effective. But I appreciate all the work that's been done with this. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I just have one more thing, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And I'll hush. But the other thing to think about too, and this may be in the report, I haven't looked at it in depth, but you know, we have our land bank authority. Our land bank authority is a good tool for helping us do some of the strike force stuff that we're talking about in that regard. But also, I think, you know, in developing the partnerships that Commissioner Wright has talked about, and Commissioner Link brought up the state. If I remember correctly, didn't the state just give Habitat, what, about $10 million or something, something to that amount to help with some affordable housing units here in our community? So I think the partnerships are important. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Houle?
Yeah, just a couple things. One, I've gotten to see the draft version, which I'm guessing is pretty close to identical to what we'll get as the final version in our agenda on Tuesday. But the longer report, I think some of y'all might be encouraged. There's a lot of mention of students in it, and there's a lot of data that's presented that talks about explicitly whether it includes or excludes students. So that might not have been as prominent in the way they address their presentation here, but the impression I got in the work on GIC and what I've seen in the report is that they've really factored in the specifics of our community, especially the student factor, in their recommendations here. But also, to build from there, some of these recommendations I think are the type that can work kind of regardless of the nature of your community. Like the local housing fund is kind of this basic idea that undergirds the rest, that gives us chips to bring to the table. So when we're trying to leverage those state funds or something, we've got some money to magnify. I don't know if somebody can go back to, I think it's slide 13, or at least it's slide 13 in what I got. But it shows like how we're able to leverage that local funding. Yeah, right there. And it mentions like DCA, Georgia Dream, and these other like state and federal programs. So, you know, this local housing fund, as I understand it, is kind of that key first step for us to have more productive conversations with those other entities and to turn what might be a lot compared to what we've locally invested, but is really only a little bit of what will be a lot more if we put that fund together. Correct me if I'm missing anything, Director
Dead on,
Wallace.
that's the
Yeah.
point I was going to make. Can everyone hear me okay? The local housing fund actually is the apparatus that allows you to get more involvement from the private market. We might be able to tap into community reinvestment dollars, foundation dollars, and actual enterprise partners, entities like that who have a willingness to fund these type of projects. It's just we have to make it attractive. And this would be the apparatus to allow us to have the flexibility to do that, which has not been necessarily utilized in this community. So I don't want to underscore that point, and I want us to make sure that we clearly understand the flexibility in that. So it's not necessarily rigid yet, but we really do need to come up with some kind of mechanism that allows us to do that and go out into the private market and to garner more support.
Yes, Commissioner Myers.
Ultimately, though, there's this complicated, complex report that we can absorb and we're going to approve or accept, right? But ultimately, though, the action of this body that will enable some of this is decisions that we make about budget for putting towards some of this. Is that correct? That's where our big responsibility will lie in the next year?
I'm going to let Manager Williams, but I would think so, but I would let Manager Williams speak to that.
Well, these are various strategies that could be employed, and obviously, as was noted, very heavy on money. Certainly, we would want to work with y'all in the wake of potential acceptance of these ideas to prioritize which ones you want, and then create the structure and framework by which the future commission can invest in it. And so, you saw a lot of different ideas, all of them seeded pretty heavily as the recommendation, $1 million here, $5 million there. So I think that's going to be the real work in the future is where do we put the dollars that are going to.
So it's deciding which place, which programs, funds, whatever to focus on, and then where we're going to have, how we're going to have money to do that.
That's correct. And Manager Williams, I would add that the Mayor Commission has already put a down payment on the down payment assistance and the rehab through ARPA funds and the Lindentown recommendation.
Okay.
And I might add too, while it hasn't been an ongoing thing, our community did vote to allocate almost $40 million to affordable housing projects. So we have put a substantial amount of dollars into affordable housing. And I do think also that we need to continue finding ways to do it, but we need to find some creative ways to do it. Like Commissioner Thornton said, we have a lot of property ourselves. Maybe we sell those properties and put it into an affordable housing program. And there's things that we can do that I'll look through the report, and hopefully that there's some ideas in there that'll come to mind. So.
Well, just, in one setting, so Commissioner Hamby's correct. So these ideas, this commission has been investing in, last few years, certainly with ARPA funds, and SPLOST funds, not just the SPLOST, not just the Lindentown, but also the accelerated phase 1. And so that might have taken a slightly different look, or, when we talk about gap financing, but y'all invested more. So, I guess concurrent with the development of the strategic plan, the commission has advanced a number of housing initiatives, investing considerable funds in that.
Okay, we have someone step into the room.
I was just going to say, as you consider all of these ideas, feel free to reach out to me and my team. We're happy to talk through some of these. They're heavy, they're very technical. It's a big document, so we're happy to walk them through you. We also have several public input events coming up that was listed in the agenda report as well. So we're here for you to answer any questions you might have. So.
Great. Any more questions or discussion? You do?
Can I just add one other thing, actually? Sorry.
Of course you can, Commissioner Holt.
So I think there's also going to be a lot of great stuff captured in this report that we can point to that will help clarify our terms for people. So like when we're trying to explain what we mean by affordable. And one of the ones that stuck out to me the most is when we say only 30% of your income should go towards housing, that's your rent and your utilities. Which is something that we haven't always gotten right on everything. Like we've had like community benefits agreements that just have talked about the rent. So I just use that as one example, but as we're kind of looking through this document, I think it's going to become a really good reference point for us being on the same page about a lot of these terms and being a bit more aggressive and effective about how we define affordable to make sure that we're using terms in our contracts with entities that actually applies to average or below average income Athenians.
Thank you. Manager Williams?
Sure. Well, Commissioner Hull, you mentioned earlier about potentially holding the agenda item, accepting these recommendations perhaps until after the homelessness strategic plan, and certainly I could ask the mayor about that. The acceptance of this is in the current cycle for you to vote on in a few weeks. I can ask the mayor to hold that if you want until after the homelessness. But it doesn't, the agenda item's not asking you to do anything other than accept the report, which of course is just saying we're in receipt of it and now we're going to work on what we want to prioritize. So
I kind of think we need the public input stuff before we accept anything. I mean, I'd like,
Yeah, and we do plan on submitting, so our public input, the written comments will be wrapping up August 30th, so we'll have a few days to combine everything we get from online forums from the 3 public events, so we'll put together a summary, share it with y'all in those days, but of course, y'all do.
well, given that, and your good point made, then I'll ask the mayor to hold this for the September-October cycle, and then the acceptance of both this and then the homelessness plan, which you'll hear about the September work session, will happen concurrently.
Okay.
I would ask that we still keep it on the agenda, just so it provides an opportunity for us to discuss and for the public to comment. But, yeah.
We're going to move along, and I will close by saying thank you to our consultants and HCD for presenting this report. I think that another opportunity is for commissioners to send thoughts and ideas to you,
Sure.
to our county manager before our next discussion about this. There was a lot of things I took notes to also, so maybe as we go along, don't just wait till we come here and come up with stuff. Send stuff ahead of time so we can be better prepared. I see Commissioner Taylor's hand.
Just so we're, this Saturday, it'll be at the Iron Triangle, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, from 11 to 1.
Okay.
All right, moving right along. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We are moving, I think we got our neighborhood leaders presentation. I am not going to give no major introduction. They speak for themselves. They are present and in the house, so we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I just want to start by saying thank you to the thank you to the commission and mayor and your staff for your innovation, your leadership, and your partnership in the Neighborhood Leaders Program. It really got started during a crisis, as it turned out. You started it before the pandemic to address a different crisis in our community. And so that shifted the first couple of years of the work. But I think some of the questions that were raised at the earlier meeting and that we're hoping to address to your satisfaction. And I also want to thank the staff. They've been extraordinary in working with us to look at those and at the performance measures. And I'm very proud of the incredible work these folks have done. But we're also committed to continuous improvement and to supporting your work. And I appreciate the complexity of what you do. Every time I watch a meeting and see all the different things y'all are addressing, it's really extraordinary. So I thank you for that. So the presentation Terrace is going to provide, so Ms. Terrace Thomas, that we have the honor of running our Neighborhood Leaders Program, and then she and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Good evening. I'm grateful also, as Tim stated, to be able to share our neighborhood leaders' presentation. The purpose of our presentation tonight is to provide you with an overview of the work that our great neighborhood leaders engage in. Also, we want to share our successes for fiscal year 2023 and provide you with our suggestions for improvements for fiscal year 2024. And lastly, we'll end with questions. As Tim stated, I concur, I follow up, and I'm sure the neighborhood leaders who are behind me would say the same. We're absolutely grateful to you as mayor and commission and the staff, of course, for your ongoing initiative, your support, and partnership. As it relates to an overview of our work, I'll start by saying, and this is our motto, but I do want to state that the neighborhood leaders are of the community, we are in the community, and we are with the community. Our neighborhood leaders build trusted relationships with their residents, the zone residents, collaborative partnerships with our partnering agencies and organizations, and with that, we're able to gather information, ongoing education, and from that information, we're able to vet that to the actual resident, connect them to the resources as needed, oftentimes emergent needs, but even the mediocre needs. And so in that, our neighborhood leaders are consistently moving, but we are excited about the collaborative engagement. This partnership utilizes the Family Connection communities and schools, our neighborhood leaders, to support ongoing community engagement and navigation for the Mayor and Commission's initiative. And as it states, our initiative is to address poverty, social disparity, and wealth inequality here in Athens-Clarke County, in addition to support implementation of the ACC Gov's strategic plan. And I'm pretty excited to state that we do address 17 of the strategic goals listed in your plan. Neighborhood leaders are trusted members of the community, providing needs assessment and service navigation to the residents here in our community, those who are living in poverty, and we do so by utilizing the Bridges Out of Poverty model. And I would like to say that particular model researches poverty, takes a look at poverty through economic class, family dialogue, we are able to look at it through a prism of mental models, hidden rules for economic class, and poverty research in and of itself. I want to start with our successes. The neighborhood leaders themselves are success stories, and they are here tonight. I'm so excited to have them here. In fact, due to their own life experiences, the neighborhood leaders identify with the residents they serve. Also, one of our successes, and I should have stated it prior to this, is that back September last year, the mayor invited me to present on our Neighborhood Leaders Program for his managers and mayors, the Hub Cities presentation that was held here. And we're so excited that the Muskogee County there in Columbus, Georgia, will be modeling the Neighborhood Leaders Program. And so we're excited to be able to assist with that. So our successes, again, personal and professional development. As mentioned earlier, Bridges Out of Poverty, our neighborhood leaders have engaged in conflict resolution, restorative circles training, nonviolent communication. Our neighborhood leaders are also Georgia Gateway System navigators, and they serve as SNAP outreach partners. Our neighborhood leaders are educated in the area of trauma and secondary stress. Our neighborhood leaders are facilitators as it relates to the Circle of Security trauma parenting. Our neighborhood leaders have received training on the CLIF system, or the Career Ladder Identifier and Financial Forecaster. And for those of you who don't know about that, the CLIF occurs, that particular effect occurs when a household is no longer eligible to receive public assistance in various programs because they now receive more money, or it is more as it relates to the threshold stated by the federal poverty level. Also, justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion. Our neighborhood leaders are educated in that. Also, we have neighborhood leaders, and we're excited about it. Citizens Police Academy, and additional training from various ACC government departments. Annually, we have annual representation for our Lead Athens program here, which is a great program, and we're excited about that for sure. Board leadership, our neighborhood leaders serve on various boards, provide that area of leadership, able to vet information, provide input to various organizations and agencies. And then employee retention. We're excited that we have had extremely low turnover. We've not had neighborhood leaders leaving, and for those who have left, it's been for better positions, greater positions. In fact, we have a neighborhood leader who's now an ACC government employee. We have a neighborhood leader who's gone on to be executive director of a local nonprofit, as well as a neighborhood leader who's gone on to be a law student at the University of New Mexico. So our outputs, I will pause to share here. This is work done at a tiered level, but it's community information, referrals, and resources. And the data is stated here. Our neighborhood leaders have engaged in ongoing housing, be it information, referrals, and connection to resources, as it states, food insecurity, and that is providing food access, as well as SNAP enrollment, health services, physical, mental, vision, and dental, employment, education services, and as the screen states, financial assistance and material distribution. And I'll just share, as it relates to just the community level, material distribution could include distributing diapers at a community event or a neighborhood resource fair. It could also include carrying that directly, delivering diapers to a resident in the zone, and so it encompasses all of that. Personal care items, material distribution is, it would include all of those things. And that data that I shared previously in the previous slide was general data that was extracted from the neighborhood leaders' comprehensive dashboard. And I do want to pause here to state much gratitude and give thanks to Athens-Clarke County Geospatial, who was able to generate the online tool whereby our neighborhood leaders enter their case data weekly, and from that, the dashboard is able to extract the data, upload the data here. And so this is just a picture of the comprehensive dashboard. Now on to outcomes, and this would be the tier that's more individual, the individual and household case management. Here in the last year, fiscal year 2023, our neighborhood leaders have assisted 604 households, made contact and assisted, and of that, we're grateful to state that 45 of those did receive housing. And again, assisted could be information sharing, providing affordable housing lists to residents, following up, and just assistance. Again, food would include, of course, weekly food box distribution. We're excited about our partnership with Mount Olive, but also SNAP enrollment. And again, our neighborhood leaders assisted over 15,000, and of those, 5,048 received food assistance. Employment, as it states there. Unemployment would be unemployment insurance, benefits, just communicating and providing support to those who are unemployed. And of that, we see 2 did receive the unemployment insurance. Health care, which is mental, of course, emotional, health care insurance, health in and of itself. And so we're grateful from the indicator report. Of course, this data is extracted. 139 assisted and 31 received health care. Child care, as stated there, 26 received, and then other public benefits. And those benefits, again, are the public benefits. It could be WIC, CAPS, just financial support. Of course, we assisted with the empty stocking fund. So, of course, 6,238 there, and 689 received assistance there as it relates to outcomes. The economic impact. From the great work our neighborhood leaders are doing, we've been able to secure over $7 million this past year and estimated in SNAP dollars into our local economy. Increase in Medicaid and Peach Care enrollment, as stated earlier, WIC, CAPS, Earned Income Tax Credit. And our neighborhood leaders distributed over $1 million this past year in food and donated goods to residents. They dispensed and installed hundreds of smoke detectors in high poverty neighborhoods and distributed over 100,000 diapers to families. So on to our improvements and our areas of focus. I'll state here again that poverty is indeed complex. Individuals and families face, and you know this, myriad of interrelated issues and challenges, both personal and systemic. And because of that, we will continue to engage and provide assistance and service to all needs that are raised, but we will focus on the following. Food insecurity, and these specific ones that I'll be sharing are the areas where we find the greatest need. Food insecurity. So as neighborhood leaders, we envision a community where every resident has affordable, accessible, healthy food. And so as it relates to a performance measure, we will pre-screen 16,000 potential SNAP applicants, enroll or re-enroll 1,000 SNAP eligible applicants, distribute fresh foods to 4,200 households, and our neighborhood leaders will host and or participate in 4 community-wide meetings, trainings, and activities focused on food insecurity. Additionally, housing access. We envision a community where every resident has a safe, affordable residence. And so we will assist 1,000 residents with education, referral, security, legal, and other information related to housing. Of those we assist, 100% of those residents who request assistance with, we will provide support there with enrollment in public housing and Section 8 programs. We'll provide referrals to shelter and other homeless services to 100% of those residents who request assistance from us as well. And we'll also host and participate for community-wide meetings and trainings to discuss and or strategic planning activities focused on housing insecurity. Physical and mental health. We envision a community, as do you, I believe, a community where every resident receives appropriate preventive and intervention services. So as neighborhood leaders, our program will provide health and healthcare information to 7,200 residents. We'll provide screening and assistance in be it health insurance, WIC, other benefits, enrollments to 100% of the residents who request such assistance. And then we'll help residents find healthcare services and providers with at least 25% of those having a provider. We will also host and participate for community-wide meetings, trainings, discussions, and or strategic planning activities focused on the areas of mental and physical health. Employment. We envision a community where every resident is able to gain productive employment. So as a performance measure, we will provide one-on-one employment assistance and referrals to 500 residents here in Athens. We will assist 2,500 individuals with job opportunity resources, and we will help 150 residents, we'll assist them with support for employment to find, and those that we assist, we're certain and we're hopeful but certain they'll find employment. And then we'll participate again in 4 community-wide meetings, trainings, and discussions, strategic planning activities focused on employment. As it relates to our improvement core competencies, as neighborhood leaders, we will continue to focus on our specialty training, but I'll go back to the competencies. We'll continue to grow in the area of our skill set training, communication skills, advocacy skills, interpersonal relationship skills. I mentioned communication, but capacity building skills, relationship building, facilitation. We will continue to grow in that area of our core competencies. Specialty trainings. We will engage in specialty trainings. I mentioned earlier, our neighborhood leaders are Georgia Gateway navigators, so we'll continue to engage in training as it relates to Georgia Gateway system, such that we are able to support our residents. Summer lunch program, continue the training that we engage in now with the Department of Early Care and Learning. Georgia Gives program, we will engage in training there. Public housing, Section 8, tax subsidized, landlord-tenant laws. We'll engage in those training. Also, the Department of Labor, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. We're engaging now with them, and we will continue. In addition, Athens Technical College. Another area of improvement, we seek to improve the data collection. Currently, as stated earlier, we are grateful for Athens-Clarke County's geospatial department who developed our data collection tool, and we're excited about that. Currently, we're using that and for our community outreach, and we engage there to provide information as stated from the dashboard. But we do seek to improve that by incorporating tracking systems, individual case management tracking, to also provide resident satisfaction surveys, and then ongoing community outreach. We also seek to improve our communications, to expand our communications with you, Mayor and Commission. We want to be very clear. We want to provide you with written quarterly reports. We want to be able to find out what's the best method of communicating with you such that we are connecting and you are very, very well aware of what it is we're doing, how we're doing it. And we're also open to have you shadow us as we're in the community for neighborhood leader canvassing opportunities. Some of those events that we stated we'll be having, we would invite you to be a part of that. We invite you, Mayor and Commission, to participate in our weekly meetings. We have neighborhood leader meetings. We'd love to have you there. And also, we'll be presenting at the annual Mayor and Commission work sessions between January and March. Questions?
All right. Ooh, all kind of hands here. We're going to go with Commissioner Fisher, Commissioner Link, and Commissioner Davenport.
First of all, thank you for your report. I really appreciate it. I just want to say, since I've been an elected official, the three community, the neighborhood leaders I've worked with have been great. They've reached out to me about services, and actually they've been very helpful to me, for me to get to know my district better. So, and they crossed over into different districts, but I just want to put that out there. They've been very helpful to me, Ms. Stovos, Ms. Bryce, Mr. Flanagan, who will be leaving, but I've been very thankful for them and for their support. And they call me when we got residents, got things going on, and how can I help or how can I connect them to different resources. So I just want to say thank you for what you all do. I think you all do a great job, and I appreciate that Athens-Clarke County government is a small part of things that you all are doing. So I just want to put that out there.
Commissioner Lane?
Yeah, I want to thank the neighborhood leaders too. I know these folks work really hard at some very, very hard work, and I've been grateful for some of the information that's been brought forward to me and for the times that I've been able to connect with the neighborhood leader and connect them to a citizen that's looking for help. I know that the resources that are available don't meet the needs. I mean, it's clear. I look at slide 13, and I know that over and over and over again, y'all can't help people. The resources just aren't there. Do you have any suggestions on what we can do to increase those resources? I know a lot of them are, federal and state-based programs. I know that more and more people are getting cut off Medicaid. Can we somehow develop some advocacy with state and federal leaders to and have these stories that you guys, interact with every single day told to the right people?
We would love to work with you to advocate with our state legislators and federal. John Ossoff was here recently, and he was very interested in ways that he might help, and I know he was a key figure with that habitat development out near Gaines School. And so, yes, please. And I think part of the idea the commission originally had, which I very much appreciate, was that neighborhood leaders can help inform you and all the rest of us about the needs they see day to day. It's one thing to look at what different public agencies or the census or other things tell you, but it's another thing for people who are actually experiencing it, have experienced it personally, but they're also working with folks who are experiencing it. And frankly, secondary trauma can be a major challenge for those folks. But having them at the table for these discussions, and you know, your departments have been great about inviting them to come to the housing discussions, the even zoning, solid waste. It's been pretty much across the board, and we welcome that. I wish I had an easy answer. I would say a big part of the answer is that elections matter, and so we're not partisan, but we do believe people should vote and advocate.
Well, we see data here, but I feel like it's the anecdotes that can be more powerful. So if we could get some of those anecdotes and be able to relay them to powers that be above our heads, and publicly, I feel like the public can become better advocates for these programs if they know the actual stories on the ground.
The data speaks to the head, the story speaks to the heart. So yes, thank you.
And the stories will be included in those quarterly reports. And as I mentioned earlier, our request to expand and improve the database or the online tool or what have you, want to make that public, want others to see what's happening, see what we're doing, make it public.
Thank you.
As we upgrade.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, thank you all. Great presentation. Can you go to slide number 11? It says the outcomes. Are those outcomes this year, 2020, well, 2023?
2020, the end of 2022.
End of 2022. And for the assistants, and not the assistant, but are you requiring certifications for the CLIF and where's that page? For the traumas and?
No, they do receive certifications, yes. Our neighborhood leaders, a great deal of the trainings, they do have certifications, yes.
And who provides those certifications?
Some have been online trainings, and or the person who's leading it. Georgia Gateway System, it would be the state. Cliff representative, he was here with us, so he did an in-person training.
Okay, thank you.
It varies.
The CLIF program, which was developed by the Federal Reserve, and they came here and did the training. But it shows that at certain income levels, if you have an increase in your income, or in your pay, you actually have a decrease in your resources, because that's what it's an acronym. I don't remember what CLIFF, but it's referring to the falling off the cliff, because suddenly you lose your SNAP benefits or your Medicaid or other things that $2,000 pay raise pushed you over the edge. But it's also very much about the career ladder, and showing that if you move into, say, this CNA position, this is how long it will take you to get that diploma, how much it will cost, if anything, the income you've lost. So in the short term, you might be worse off, but at what point you're making more? And then if you move up to other positions, it's really a pretty remarkable and helpful tool. And I'll say that when the Federal Reserve gentleman presented it to the neighborhood leaders, every one of them said, "This is what we need, this is what we need. We know this is happening, but this helps us to be more precise with it."
CLIF is Career Ladder Identifier and Financial Forecaster.
There you go. I say, we're moving over to this side. I think I see Commissioner Myers. I see Commissioner Houle.
Thank you for all this presentation and for all your work. I will say I've met with some of the community leaders and neighborhood leaders, but I would like to do a better job of doing that. And I did talk to Latasha Sheets. I'm not sure if she's here this evening, but talk to her about perhaps getting together with, because there's multiple leaders, and sort of setting up whatever works best for different commissioners, but setting up some sort of regularly scheduled meetup would be really helpful for me to be able to communicate better, but to learn from the neighborhood leaders for me to reach out. I have a newsletter, I talk to people, but there's a lot of people you guys are in contact with who are not using I don't have those ways of communicating with them. And, communication is such a challenge these days when we don't have like one newspaper, right, out there. And I was just thinking of you all last week or whenever we were hearing the Boys and Girls Club presentation and the talk about the programs there and getting to some of the neighborhoods to make sure that those services and that people know about them. I was talking about some like Clarke Gardens and Athens Garden on the east side and getting into neighborhoods that are not public housing. So I'd like us all to sort of like work together on that. And I know one way I could do that better is to be meeting on a regular basis. I've discovered the, recurring Outlook calendar meeting is very helpful for me. So when I get together with whoever you are out, there, who are now in my new district, I'd like to just go ahead and do that so that we can have better communication.
So would you like for us the neighborhood leader to make contact with you to schedule that, or would you make?
Yeah, no,
contact with
you
us?
guys go for it,
Absolutely.
Reach out to me,
We would
and then
love
we
that.
all, whoever's, and you guys can look in the map, because I'm having a hard time figuring out where those lines are.
We would
So-
love that, but as stated earlier, we do meet every week. So that's four meetings a week, but we can designate one of those meetings for mayor and commission presence. If you like, just let us know what.
No, I
they're
mean
open
just
to.
meeting individually with me, meeting with the ones who are in my area,
great.
like every other month or something like
Coordinate
that.
that as well.
That'd be great.
That's exciting, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Commissioner Hu?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here and for all y'all being here. Yeah, a couple things. First, I'm really looking forward to those. I think you said it's going to be like quarterly summary reports. That'll help me kind of make sense of the dashboard, which can be kind of overwhelming. Like what stands out to you all as like the real main point here? Like what are we missing or where do we need to focus more energy? It's also really helpful to know that you'd like to see us at those weekly meetings. I've kind of deliberately avoided them, thinking like that's not really my place to be. But I do like the idea. I mean, if there was some kind of like recurring thing that maybe it's like, this is the meeting where we know the mayor and commission is welcome, and you all can think about like how you want to discuss things that you think are relevant to us. And we can also know that we're not just like happening upon a meeting where we're maybe interrupting what they might need in their workplace without a commissioner in the room. So I kind of lean towards like if there was like that one meeting a month that made sense, that would be great. And I'll definitely endeavor to be at those.
Thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to share, I mean, I think that we got this program established and then COVID hits. And I think it's a testament to the abilities of your organization and each of the neighborhood leaders that were involved at the time, some of whom are still involved, to kind of totally pivot from what I think that original vision was to this like direct service social work kind of work. And what I see as like this major challenge is how do we get back to that original vision, which I know you spoke to a bit here. But when I kind of look through what you've got listed as like the things you're doing under each of those visions, which are like great visions and ones that I think we really align with as well, is like, so what can we do, or what can y'all, like, how do we think about, I'm not going to pretend like this is an easy question at all, but like, I guess what I imagine us maybe trying to discuss in one of these monthly meetings or something is like, how do we pivot toward the neighborhood leaders playing more of a coordinator role in like empowering people in their neighborhoods to organize themselves, instead of being more of the like frantic messenger and frantic deliverer of a given service or a given reference? Because I feel like a lot of what people have been kind of caught up in from what I've heard is this like just overwhelming array of people who really get to know our neighborhood leaders well and see them as a resource. But then they're just kind of constantly answering calls and trying to make references. And I see that becoming almost like neighborhood leaders are becoming this like funnel for the mess. Instead of being like the coordinators of neighborhoods to hopefully like empower those neighborhoods. And like, how do you empower neighborhoods that aren't already organized themselves to be more organized is like a nearly impossible feeling question. But I guess I kind of feel like that's the direction I'd like to see this program go in the future, which I think might be like less maybe overwhelming for the neighborhood leaders day to day, but also maybe like yield more transformative results. So I'm not pretending like I have a specific idea of how we do that. I feel like framing the conversation in those terms is what makes sense to me, so that we're not just talking about like how do we up the number of SNAP enrollments or up the number of references to housing, but like, how do we see, what might be harder to measure quantitatively, like, how do we see more neighborhoods being more organized themselves with each other, and what role do they play in that?
I would say that our neighborhood leaders are doing a bit of that now. They are indeed doing a bit of that, but
No doubt, yeah.
our neighborhood leaders are also information referrals. They gather information and they connect to resources. And so one way to see that shift to where they're simply coordinating is to meet the needs. Because if the need is a consistent need for food, then they're going to respond to that. And so some of that won't change until that changes.
Yeah, so-
But they are, I will just to respond to the fact that some of them are, there is some coordination happening. They are empowering residents when their situation changes, but it's also the back and forth and the
Definitely, and so
follow-up.
part of that's maybe like, we know where we need to invest more, but I guess where I'm also thinking is like, you know, this part of this is informed by our desire to like look at, we're renewing this contract, which we have in it. I mean, are we putting outcomes in that contract that are forcing y'all to collect data or do work that actually works against that more transformative goal? Because in the contract, you've got to get so many SNAP enrollments. You see what I'm saying? So like, I guess that's where I'm also wondering, like, well, how do we need to recalibrate what we're asking of y'all so that you're not stuck doing too much of that minutia?
And I appreciate that. In fact, I appreciate what a lot of y'all have said about working together with us to address these things. And part of the shift in our presentation to focusing on data was in response to concerns that were expressed about, well, what are the outcomes? And it's much, much harder to measure how much somebody feels connected in the community, how much they feel that power that's there, but they haven't ever thought it was there. It's a lot harder to measure that than it is to measure whether you got the in SNAP. And I will say it's important to get it's for the community. That $7 million is just literally the annual amount that they have brought in or bringing in per year to households. That makes a huge difference when they're getting that couple $100s a month each. And it's also great for the economy because those households tend to buy their groceries in local stores. But so that part is important. But I completely agree about wanting to figure out ways to better both do that part, which many of them do, but also how do you measure that?
Commissioner Fisher, then Commissioner Wright.
Just want to respond to my colleague, Commissioner Houle. One thing that our neighborhood leaders did, that we did the Juneteenth, and that was the people over in the Rolling Ridge area put that on, worked with our staff to get that going, and it was a good collaboration. So I think those things have already started, and given the that particular community the resources to do what they need to do and put that event on. It was a great event, well attended. Like I say, standing room only, and the neighborhood leaders came out in force. But that community, though, they were empowered to do that. They had that opportunity to put that, and they want to put that on. Now it's so large, though. In my opinion, we probably gonna need to move it to a bigger place. But that community responded and did an outstanding job. So I think those type of things are going on, and those stories need to be told. So.
Commissioner Wright.
I just wanted to use this last slide to say thank you to you guys, because I know day in, day out, day, night, that you guys are working, like we say, in the community, with the community. What was all that you said in there? In and with the community. And I really appreciate the work that you do. I don't want to be critical of it here at all. And I don't want the assessment request or that extra work you're doing for the assessment details to make you think we don't know how hard you're working. But we're doing that for across the board. We want to make sure that there's evidence and assessment tools, and I'm glad that we were able to help you with something that's working for your dashboard, and hopefully you're getting that back and forth to make sure it stays user-friendly.
Yes.
And doesn't take you away from the face-to-face people part that I know that is probably drives your getting up every day to do what you do.
One of the things your staff pointed out to us, they said, you're reporting on 34 different outcomes.
Yeah.
And let's narrow that down.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of narrow.
They're going to continue to work on all those
Yeah.
things because
Yeah.
those households are
Yeah.
facing all those things.
We tend to
but
want
you don't
all of
really need
everything,
that.
but it's not a priority if there's more than 5 topics. But you have a lot to deal with, and I do appreciate all of your all's work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we're coming to an end. I've been with the neighborhood leaders from its inception. Mike and I were real proud to put this in our prosperity package, and it has evolved. One of the things that I noticed in your presentation that is missing, that to me would answer Commissioner Link's question about elected officials, voter registration was actually written in the original agreement, but I don't see it now in your presentation.
Our neighborhood leaders, that's one of their one of their performance expectations. Civic engagement is one of the prongs, so they are indeed involved in that.
Okay.
Those were the top ones with the highest numbers.
And I think if we use our election, not partisan, but just practical, helping our elected officials understand, and it's best being heard from the people that are experiencing it. So you just don't want to register folk and they go vote and they vote for the wrong person, but help them understand what the issues are.
Educate.
So it could do what Commissioner Link is talking about or trying to address.
Absolutely.
And my other point was, this is not a criticism, but it is a question. Neighborhood Leaders was funded through the
Prosperity package?
Prosperity, what's that fund we did? Contingency fund. And now you're in the general budget. I don't know how y'all got there, so thank the good Lord, you there. But my question now becomes to Manager Williams, because one of the ways we had talked about to continually fund the neighborhood leaders and help it grow was the grant writers. And the grant writers to assist with the growth. And I think Mr. Jones said we're about to hire one of the grant writers, or we're in that process. So I do think that might address some of the funding issues. There are so many funds out here that serves this kind of work nationally, statewide, and locally. But you do need somebody dedicated to that. So I'm assuming, I would like for us to commit as the local government to get the grant writers up and look at your initiatives and get those funds in. Actually, I struggle with the neighborhood leaders being in the general budget, but I have if that's where you are, that's good for me. But our budget is always so tight, and we got to help you find other resources to keep the good work going. Okay.
I just did a really quick idea
ma'am.
when you were
Yes.
mentioning the voter registration. And that part, I was looking at the description of neighborhood leaders and that civic engagement part,
Yeah.
which is hard to do, and connecting with what's going on in the government. Something I don't promote enough, but would be a nice, easy thing to promote, is all these notifications that we have out here. So I know there's some, Commissioner Wright is always really great at reminding us that there are these notifications for emergencies and other things. And that would be a great thing to get out there in the community, whether it's announcements about public meetings, whatever it is. You could go through, there's an awful lot of them. So there might be ones you'd want to emphasize in terms of getting connected to the government, because I would like to see that
That's real.
empowerment part.
And I'd like to see that actually in the plans, being connected to government. Manager Williams and I've talked about how our surveys go, and we're not reaching the
Right.
people that really need to be answering. And this is how our decisions are being made. So I would love to see us develop that relationship. Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you.
Davenport?
Thank you all. Again, how much, this is for Manager Williams, how much is the Neighborhood Leaders Program annually? And do, the contract renews in September or October? I
Well-
forget when we discussed that.
So it's a little north of $1 million. It's about $1 million annually, and that's been augmented over time. And the hope is that the term of the contract would run concurrent with your fiscal year, so that each year that would, your decision to fund that or any changes to it, as the Mayor Pro Tem alluded to, would happen in tandem with the budget. So we're sort of continuing the existing contract month to month until you all approve this, and we could change it, but I would advocate for it to have a termination of June 30th next year, and then we can talk about it in the budget and provide for it and move forward.
Great. Any other thoughts from commissioners?
Could I just mention one thing
Yes,
that
sir.
relates to, unmeasurable, but I truly believe that there are neighborhoods in this community who have always felt with enormous justification that they did not have a role to play. And when they have folks who come from their neighborhood, who grew up in their neighborhood, who connect, who look like them, who share the same culture, who are doing this work and who are connecting with commissioners, it's a slow thing, but I truly believe that that is helping people in those neighborhoods feel more connected to the government, to the community as a whole, more a part of it. And we can't measure that, but I think that's one of the most important things they do. And so again, thank you all for your vision and making that happen.
Okay. Oh. All right. Do we need a break? Are we good?
I need to take a quick break.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, everybody. And we ready? Okay. Mike is giving me a hard time about the time. I think we're doing,
No, I'm good.
but I think we're on good time. We're doing good. So, but hurry it up, Brad.
Ma'am.
I can talk to you that way. I can't talk to everybody else. Okay. We're going to turn it over. We're going to have a presentation on our land use plan, and I'll just turn it over to Brad.
All right, thank you, and good evening, all. What we are going to bring to you tonight, Mark and Bruce will present to you, is kind of a high-level introduction to the land use planning process that we've all been talking about for a long time, that is currently underway. We are working on it. We're getting into that part where it's community involvement. And so tonight will just be high-level. We'll follow up tonight with a memo that will come to all of you with general information of a little more info on what we're going to talk about. That will come to you through the manager's office after this. And then what we'd really love, if we could find a couple hours with you in the next few weeks to maybe host you over at Daugherty Street and take a deeper dive into this issue of land use planning, what y'all's role is. I mean, it's a super important process. It's one that you guys need to be actively involved with. You have to be at the end, but we want you to go into this process involved with us with an understanding of what your role is, what we're doing and why. And so we'll try to get that set up. I know your schedules are super busy, but love to do something for maybe an hour and a half or so over at Daugherty Street where we could be open to the public as well and just have a conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and he will get us going.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having us this evening. Real quick, just going to go through a few key terms here just so we can kind of set the stage. This whole presentation tonight's a lot about process and procedure. We're going to delve into some of the issues and some of the data that we're looking at to kind of tease that a little bit for you all. But we're really looking at this, so we're talking a lot about resources here at the very beginning. We're still very broad level here. But so we started to look at this as a resource, and we thought, how do we deal with the resources we deal with in a regular life? We deal with that a lot through a budget. So this budget keeps a lot of things from being overwhelming in our lives. It helps us guide us where we're going, helps us reduce emergencies, helps us plan for what we need and what we want. So we're trying to take an approach of using data to begin with, taking that budgetary mindset, and then putting together some of the other pieces that are out there. So that's a lot to do with our natural and our built environment. So we're going to show you about some of our environmentally sensitive areas, our infrastructure, population projections, and then down the road we get to where the availability for acreage for development is going to be. So through that, we've got really a two-step process. We're right there at the beginning of step one, a few months into it, I guess, of the growth concept map. That's what we're doing this fall. That's what we're showing you right now. Very generalized. We're talking about land use characteristics. We're talking about development areas. We're talking about districts, nodes, corridors, and we'll show you a little bit on the map. That all feeds into our future land use map, which is our expected workload for after the first of the year and definitely through next summer into the fall of 2024. That gets down to the parcel-specific level. That deals with the future land use categories, which in and of themselves are kind of broad-based, but they work along with a matrix, a compatibility matrix in our code that tells you when we go through planning decisions and other decisions, how we are going to move forward and how those things work together. So we're going from the big, the growth concept map right now, down to the small. And then in the end, we all have this kind of guided by our comprehensive plan. We just recently had our state-required 5-year update. And I know it sounds quite a ways off, but we're planning these two efforts and then some larger zoning efforts that would follow up from that to go into our 2028 comprehensive plan. So that's kind of the view we have. So real quick, these guiding elements, the three I was talking about there, the natural environment, the built environment, and how planning plays into that. So if you kind of look across this spectrum, it goes from fairly rigid to the fairly flexible side. So our natural environment, our topography, our rivers, our riparian buffers, and our preserved open space, we're not going to be able to touch and move. We're not changing mountains here. We're not relocating rivers. So these are some really rigid boundaries that we have, and we're going to show you that here on a map in just a second. That gets into our built environment, our infrastructure. We have a gravity-based sewer system. We have one public lift station, one private one, and I believe before you all is the possibility for a third. That's along with a rezone item that's before the Planning Commission as we speak. So we've got that, which is a very, very big edge, and that edge is going to be shown across our maps as we move forward. We've got our water system, we've got our roadways, trails, we've got our transit network. So these are a lot of things that are fairly firm and stationed, but these things can change, often with a lot of cost. So we're trying to be mindful of that. We're trying to find ways to open those things up and make those aspects of our community, which are rather set in place, used to their capacity, or used efficiently, hopefully not all the way to their capacity. And then we get into the most flexible end of this. So we get into the planning side. We've got our comprehensive plan, zoning regulations, zoning map, and our future land use map that we'll be working on. So a lot more flexibility there, but a lot of ramifications with all those decisions. And we're going to leave you with some potentially tough decisions to make at the end of the evening that we're going to get to at the end of this process. So just kind of showing you where we're at kind of data-wise. We've got our sewer service area here outlined in red. I think of this as the sideways running ghost that's kind of looking back. You see his eyes and his mouth up there at the top. He's sort of turned like this. So this is a fairly rigid boundary. We cannot get too much.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I'm listening.
I needed a break there. Thank you. Okay, so we see this as a fairly rigid edge. We can talk with our utilities department about how we can get beyond these areas, but until we do get beyond these areas, there's a lot of density and development potential that has to be brought inside of this area. The colors you can see there are just a population. So you can also start to begin to see patterns and trends, and that's a big thing in this process that we're trying to understand, we're trying to listen to the community about, and we're trying to get a handle on. So there's areas where we've got some room to sort of move into, and then we've got some areas that we're kind of hot in already. You see downtown, and then you see just to the west of campus there. So just kind of showing you a little bit, teasing a little bit of the data that we're working on here, and trying to begin to establish some patterns that we hope you all will see throughout this process. So the growth concept map, our business at hand right now and through this fall, we're looking at that budget, we're looking at those environmental areas, where that infrastructure is, where the growth can and can't go, and where some of that land is. Our next step through that is to get into the community engagement. We intend to be into that process in early September. We really, really need your support here. This is the part of the process where groups like the leadership group before us, we'd like to reach out to. We'd like to use some of your networks. We'd like you all to be reaching out to your constituents and help us out with some of those processes. We should have a little intro into the water bill for the September cycle that should give a little bit of information on that. Due to the deadlines, we probably won't have any dates in there, but we'll have some ways for people to reach out to us and get in touch. And then we're going to rely on the Public Information Office to really help spread that word further as we get into it. So that all filters down to some growth concept scenarios at the end of this fall. We're going to be looking at those community priorities. We're going to be looking at how the character might change a little bit, and we're going to come up with a map that's fairly similar looking in scope to the one that's up there. You see the in-town area in the yellow-orange, you see the suburban area in the white kind of light blue, and then we get to the rural area in green, which is a big part of what we did 25 years ago, was establish that rural edge there. It's gotten chewed into just a little bit, and there's some other spots where maybe we need to open up a little bit. So that's some of that data and some of that infrastructure analysis. And then you can kind of see we've got our districts here, our neighborhood business districts, our downtown district, our work districts, industrial and commerce along Atlanta Highway and going out towards Athens-Tech there. So this is vague again. We're at that 30,000 foot view still, and that's what we'll be working on this fall. That 30,000 foot view, along with community engagement, will lead into our future land use map effort next year. That's where we get down to the parcel specific stuff. That's where we're going to get into a lot of response from the public input, and that's where we're really going to get into where the hard decisions are. And to kind of describe where we were during our last round, which was early 2000s of this effort, and where some of those hard decisions will lead us, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Lonnie.
And thank you. I'm going to speak quickly on a little bit of history and bring it into present day. I get to be that old guy who was here for some of this stuff before and is trying to make sense of it for the future. What that future land use map is that we're trying to achieve right now is a 20-year vision for how our land should be used. So we're really focusing on that 20-year window. As Mark noted, we're balancing conservation goals with our development and our redevelopment needs. And we want to make this a parcel-specific arrangement so that property owners and businesses and you understand where we're going with a level of specificity that we can articulate it and people can understand. But, and as we noted, as part of the comp plan. But why is this important? This document, the future land use map, is a foundational document for certainly our zoning, our development regulations. It guides our existing infrastructure usage, where we make decisions on who can tap into what we already have in the ground, and where we may need to expand to achieve the things that we want to see change. It'll guide community facilities decisions, parks, libraries, cooperatively with the schools. Our staff and the school board staff over the years have worked very closely on land use issues using this document. It is certainly a supporting document for economic development. When somebody's looking at Athens-Clarke County to locate their business, one of the things that we guide them to is what is our future look? Where are we trying to attract that growth? Where are we trying to bring our housing? Where are their employees going to live? That's all represented in this document. And then really not last, but most importantly, and I think we've heard it here tonight, this document informs other community development policies and programs, things that you want to fund, things that you want to support. A lot of that decision-making starts right here with this document. So in the past, we've wrestled with things with our future land use map, issues that have been in front of the community, that have engaged the community, galvanized the community in many ways. And in 1999, when we did a major overhaul, there were really 3 topics that had everybody out in force. We had a lot of engagement because people were concerned about sprawl, inefficient use of our land. Correlated to that, there was a big push to protect green space. We had land use policies in place at the time that anticipated growth to every edge of our community, regardless of its impact on infrastructure. And we also had a very high priority put on not urban design in the way that it makes things look, but urban design in the way it functions. What priorities were we setting in our land use policies? What we had at the time was car first. And what we're trying to do is create some balance so that pedestrians and neighborhoods had a chance to not have to fight up against vehicles to do what they wanted to do and have a quality of life. So under there, we had tough decisions to make. And the future land use plan was used as a tool by this body and by community leaders to take some really bold steps. We placed a rural designation on all of our unsewered land. That was a very bold step. That was about 1/3 of our land that was protected that way. We worked on single-family and multifamily density to raise it in targeted areas where we knew it would work. We wanted to increase commercial development inside the loop first before it stretched outward. We wanted vertical mixed use, and we wanted it by right, not to have to come and ask for permission every single time, but to set up the system so that somebody could do what we wanted them to do in the development community and achieve our goals. And then we reduced parking requirements, believe it or not. They were higher once upon a time. With green space, we downzoned our AR zone by 90%. That was an extremely bold step. And we made it through. That withstood the challenges that followed and has become a pivotal sort of cornerstone land use policy that we've held on to. We established a green space program that's been very successful. We set up riparian buffers and floodplain protection that became a model for the state. We adopted a community tree management ordinance that was extremely unique and very development friendly in the way it's administered. And then we upped our open space requirements so that we were getting that kind of protection with each development and not having to put it on the back of the local government to go and do those things after the fact. And then with urban design, we looked at making sidewalks and street trees a requirement with all development. That was brand new. Putting parking beside or behind buildings was brand new. Some bars were set for architectural expectation. We worked on our corridors and tried to set some standards for those. And we implemented our first complete streets policy because of the future land use plan. But that was a while ago. So where are we looking now? Well, we don't know all the issues we're going to hear from the community, but we're betting that we're going to hear these three. Certainly affordable housing is at the forefront of all of our minds. And this document, we heard it tonight with the very first presentation, could be a foundational document for achieving some of the goals that we want to achieve when it comes to housing. Increasing by rights density could be a very difficult, challenging topic for us to talk about it, but it's something we need to deal with. Whether that comes in the form of accessory dwelling units or allowing duplexes and triplexes and multiplex development in our RS zones, that would be a pretty bold step. Reducing parking further, because that's eating up valuable land that could be used perhaps for housing. Looking at a single-family inclusionary zoning, that's already on our work program. Multifamily is in place, but our next step was to do single-family after the adoption of this document because it's going to help guide where those things should go. And then multifamily redevelopment incentives, another thing we heard tonight, would be anticipated with some of the work we would do with the future land use map. Infrastructure management, some real tough policies here. Coming up with something that is uniformly expressed and has expectations about our lift stations. How to do possibly shared septic in certain applications where it makes sense. Both of those have direct costs on development, particularly housing. Maybe we start to have conversations about our tree and sidewalk banking, even though that starts to turn into the discussion of an impact fee. Perhaps we can link it to certain types of development and make it a part of the implementation of what we see out of the future land use map. Stormwater design. Right now, we have an approach that looks at grouping those types of things, but maybe there's ways that are more innovative that can also be cost-effective and help redevelop some of our commercial corridors in particular, where it's very, very challenging to do stormwater that meets code. Oak and Oconee Street is a perfect example. And a park fee ordinance. Other communities have something similar, where as the density increases, you try to provide the green space. How do you pay for that? You link the two. Tough decisions. Urban design. We're already talking about taller buildings. You as a body have heard that come up several times just this year. Beefing up our architectural requirements so that we see the things in our community that we expect to see. But the trade-off for that is for a developer, if we're going to require things to architecturally be more detailed, we're going to have to back off on some other things. Maybe minimum parking requirements need to go away as part of that. There's been conversation about conservation districts as an alternative to historic districts that can also help guide how growth occurs in our in-town areas and our historic areas. Corridor master plans have always been a tool that we've looked to, but they haven't always been driven first by the future land use map. And that is something that we'd like to see happen. And a maximum commercial lot size requirement. That would be a super bold step. That would be something that avoids the super block kind of developments that we see that tend to strain resources and dramatically change the character of the community. And then horizontal mixed use. We were successful with vertical mixed use to some point, but now maybe we need to look at our corridors and have that as a redevelopment option. So with those things in place, we have a timeline that we want to follow to get moving and move this towards you, and I want Mark to walk through the timeline and the next steps, and then we're open for questions.
Yeah, just real quick, got 2 more slides for you here. Timeline, this is for the growth concept work, so this is trying to get us through the end of the year. We've got all of our data collection that's been going on for quite a bit there up until this month. We're still doing a little bit of that. A lot of that analysis is still to come. So we've had a input work session with the Planning Commission, which was very good. We dove a little bit more into some of those data details, which is what we'd like to do with this body, as Brad proposed early on when we began this presentation. We're tonight at that second orange dot. That orange ring would be that follow-up that we're looking for. Gets us to about the end of August, where we're going to get into some training for our public input. We have 3 classes of graduate students at the College of Environment and Design that are looking to help out this effort, as well as community leaders, and solicited some input from you all early on in this process. So I appreciate any of those leaders that you guys can send our way, those contacts. That public input phase will take us through quite a bit of the fall, where we'll be doing some of the background work at the same time, a lot of that analysis of the input as we collect it, and data analysis, which should get us to a growth concept map by the end of the year there on the side. Just to kind of put this in the larger context, we sort of went a little bit year by year, so we've got growth concept, data, public input analysis going on this year. Then we're working into our consultant analysis, hopefully with some of the money that was allocated to the planning department in the last budget cycle, our future land use work, additional public input, additional analysis, and hopefully final approval of the future land use map at that point. And then, as I spoke, we're looking beyond that to get into policies, text amendments, our missing middle housing policies, and eventually into a comprehensive plan and the potential of a large zoning code rewrite. So in all that effort, we've got some distinct opportunities here coming up, and we provided you all with a copy of these slides in paper form because we know you want to keep them by your bedside and read over this, especially if you're trying to get to sleep at nighttime. So we appreciate you all doing that. I want to recognize Stephen Jaques and Max Doty from the planning department here. You'll likely be hearing from myself and Bruce, but Stephen and Max are also valuable team members to this, so you might be hearing from them as well. So just wanted all of you who hadn't met any of us to be familiar with our names and who we are. And we appreciate that. We'd love some questions from you all.
Commissioner Hamby?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And as I was reading through this, I didn't have the hard copy with me, but now that I've got it, some of it's really good. Some of it, I don't know that is going to make me sleep all that well. You know, certainly as we've had conversations in the past, you know, I look at the possible policies that are laid out here. And I hope as we go through community meetings that we're, and I hope I'm doing the same thing too, to keep an open mind about what's being discussed and whatnot, and making sure that we're trying to go to people that aren't necessarily coming to the meetings and making sure that we're doing that. You know, because I certainly see the increase by right sort of things with the duplexes and the multiplexes, quadplexes, and RS zones. You know, I'd be concerned if I came to one of the meetings and saw that. I'd want to know how that's going to impact gentrification, how that's going to impact when you're in an in-town neighborhood where you don't have many available lots. It may compel somebody to buy a house, tear it down, and build a quadplex back in its stead. How do you address that? And those are questions that I know folks in the district I represent, and I'm sure you have folks in your areas too that will, want to know the answers to that. How do you manage that, and how do you make sure it's doing what it's intended to do, which is to provide more affordable housing? So if you're offering something by right, maybe there's something there that they have to abide by in order to get it. But again, it goes back to also, when we all get these demolition permits in some neighborhoods, how is that going to impact the neighborhood when we go for, yeah, exactly. So there is that, but like I said, and also, the land use plan, it is very important because it does guide us in our budget process. I mean, the more we grow, the more we have to address a lot of things. Police service, fire service. If we're going to build taller buildings, we're going to have to get a taller ladder to go up there, as we've all realized. So there is that. But I also maybe make a recommendation that perhaps we also start looking at some, and we don't do this on our land use plan, but a regional sort of approach. If we're needing affordable housing here in Athens, why don't we look and see what our surrounding communities are also doing to address that issue? And maybe there's some things that we can partner with our surrounding neighbors to help us address that. And I don't know if that's coming through this, but just some things to think about. My final point is this. I was around in the 1999 and the Grow Green and this City Hall was packed with Stay Green signs at several meetings. I don't want us to diminish the work that was done in 1999, because I think quite a bit of that work was good work, and it's helping us guide us here today. And what brings, you mentioned economic development, there's been several companies that come to town because of how Athens has developed. And we want to make sure that when we start talking about going into the Greenbelt, that Greenbelt was part of what brings people here to our community. We don't want to lose what is good in Athens and go from there. So I hope I'm making sense in all of this. I just don't want us to throw everything out in 1999 and start all over again.
And you didn't ask a question, but I'm going to make a comment. We're always nervous when we put potential policy outcomes on the screen.
Yeah, I got nervous too.
Because we haven't gone through the public input process yet.
Right.
That community engagement is meaningful. And so as we go through that, and as we make professional recommendations on how to achieve the goals that we're hearing from the community, that's where we're going to be coming to you with some recommendations on pathways to get there. What we wanted to do tonight was just paint the picture of how this document is impactful for guiding you through those tough decisions.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And that's all that was really meant to be.
Well, and I'll take responsibility for that because, this whole process concept is just not intuitive to the average person, right? And there's a lot of lack of understanding out there. And really, y'all, even all of us, to fully understand the implications of the decisions that were made 20 years ago and what we're seeing now, I mean, it's pretty striking. And so what I'd ask staff to do, Commissioner Hamby, was not lead with, we want to do these things. It's like, look, there's a lot of things that have been talked about over the years that this is all going to come to a head here. So we wanted to put y'all on notice how important this was. And as you talk to your constituents, it could involve discussions about these various things. It may not. We're going to let the public hearing and your direction help inform us. But, these are going to be some hard issues to work through and decide. And it's going to have such a lasting impact. I just felt like I wanted to put it up there since, so the public would know that, hey, pay attention to this, come to these meetings. It could involve these conversations, but it doesn't have to.
Well, and just one more point, if you could. I mean, and there's some things that work together. So certainly, like if we reduce the parking minimums or address the parking issue, then you have more room to build density. That's right. So there's things like that you can work through.
That's right.
And go from there. So, thank you.
I think it's Commissioner Myers, Commissioner Holmes.
Yeah.
Everybody over there.
Yeah, there's everyone over there, but since you look this way with your team over here on this side, I'll speak up and move forward here. A couple of things. In terms of the outreach, I know that it's really hard to get people to come out to things until things are threatening them. As we're seeing on the east side with our discussion of a new firehouse, which affects zoning, which is connected to this. So one of the things is to think about maybe for that next meeting how we are going to engage more than just the people who come out the last minute out of fear and protection. Someone sent me a graphic that was, it's I forget what the word is, but anyway, it says people who are pretty much dead want to stay in future housing plan, and the people who are in this look like me, right? And it's like, how do we get people? And in my public meetings, a lot of people, I'm young in my public meetings, so how do we get the people who are 40? How do we get the people who are not among the 47% of homeowners who need a place to live? So, if we need to somehow do something a little different, I don't have the answer there to get more people involved in those different demographics. And while you're at it, when is the, what is it called, the Urban 3 kind of analysis? Where does that go in this kind of, or whatever it tends to be, in this process? And the last thing is on that map, density map with the red lines, that's where the infrastructure ends, right?
Sewer.
The sewer. So we'd have to do a gigantic investment to go beyond that.
Either that, or we have to be very creative with where we choose to jump those basins with lift stations.
Okay.
And that's where we were suggesting kind of having a policy for when that's okay and when it's not okay, and adhering to that is something we want to talk about.
Okay.
To your point about engagement with everybody and maybe engaging the folks that we don't see all the time. Some of the things that we're trying to do differently this time around, we're putting a high focus on creativity. We want to have an online platform that's exactly the same, if possible, with an in-person opportunity, so that we're getting data both from conversations and tabling that we would also get from somebody who's maybe not comfortable coming out or has access online and prefers to do it that way. We're also going to try to do some walks in the community that are targeted, that are focused to be illustrative of the issues that we're wrestling with, because that's always better. We've done a few of those with some of our special projects where we've taken people out into a neighborhood and walked just 2-3 blocks. And it's amazing how people see things for the first time that way and put it in a light where maybe this is something that could be replicated elsewhere and be beneficial, or maybe this is enough. We don't want to see this elsewhere. So we're going to try to do things that way, and we're going to do it in a very quick turnaround. That's the other thing we've learned in the past. We love engagement. If you start to do it for a year, you start losing people. So we've got to be very organized, hit it quick, take the input, and then reflect it back so they can see their fingerprints.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hall?
I think one of my two questions, just to clarify, so the future land use economic analysis that's in the budget, like where do we anticipate that beginning and concluding? I think it's on like slide 10. You show
Urban 3.
it might be Urban 3 or somebody else like them, but like, I see it listed. I think that's what you mean by consultant analysis, 2024, and it's listed before future land use. So I'm just kind of curious, like, when do we expect that to begin, and when does that get wrapped up and presented to us? Because in my mind, that has a big bearing on how we think about growth concept and future land use.
So, procurement processes being what they are, we're going through an RFP, and we'll be working with a consultant. We don't know the name of that consultant just yet.
Yeah.
We needed to get going, though, and so we felt comfortable doing the broad-brushed growth concept that was not parcel-specific. Because what the urban threes of this world do is they look at parcel-specific things and those values. So we're going to fold them in once the growth concept is put together and let that inform a first draft of a future land use that compares our current future land use and maybe a couple scenarios. And that's where they'll do their analysis for us, and we're looking for that in the new year.
Okay, in the new year before we're finalizing the future
Correct.
land use map with hopefully
Several
enough
months.
time, not like in the same meeting or something.
No,
Okay,
several
okay.
months before, several months before.
Okay, and then the only other question I had, hopefully this isn't too much of a curveball, but like, is now or is it later during the zoning conversation, but when, if at all, would it be appropriate to talk about the potential of shifting to form-based code in lieu of like a more conventional approach to zoning? Is that a now conversation or a later conversation?
I think it's
Or a
both.
never conversation?
No, I think it's both. And what we've kicked around as a staff is having our growth concept map inform our form-based code. Right now, the growth concept map is sort of it's an exercise, it's a document, it's not an official document. But if we start creating those character areas, much like form-based code looks at like a transect model where the type of development changes super rural to super urban and every bandwidth in between, that's kind of what the growth concept map is. And maybe we can have our regulations respond to those character areas so that CG zoning in your district changes noticeably when it's outside of Cleveland Road, west of Cleveland Road, and as it comes into town and those character areas change, that CG zoning responds with different development standards that are more form-based.
Okay.
So maybe I'm answering your question, but
I think so. So in your mind, form-based code would be a complement to, but not a substitute for zoning. It would be kind of overlaid essentially.
Correct.
But we would formalize it more strongly through the growth concept map and the future land use map. Is that?
Yeah, we'd give it that relationship. Right now, we have a very soft kind of form reference in our code. And the timeline that Mark presented, that hint of a zoning code overhaul in 2025-ish, that was a placeholder for the form-based stuff to maybe take some shape if we decide to go that route.
Okay. since I was not paying attention whose hand went up first, we're going to just start with.
Number one.
We're going to start with one and just go on down the
I
road.
got easy questions. So you have mentioned something about public input. You are going to collaborate with UGA grad students. Can you repeat that one more time?
We have 3 classes from the College of Environment and Design that their professors are keenly interested and they're working in the fall. And they're going to provide those grad students to help us at tabling events and help us on these walks so that they can record people's comments and be engaged, be present for those moments. And it's a great learning experience for them. But it's really going to help us making sure that we get things recorded thoroughly because we're going to have a quick turnaround. So we need every little piece of information that comes out of those moments.
And so zoning is very technical. Will there be like a one-pager for people who are not involved or not aware? Will they have it prepared, or will y'all have it prepared for the residents to say like, this is RS zoning, this is what this looks like, or?
We're going to try to downplay the zoning side because it is so technical. What we're going to try to do in this first wave is just talk about development character, which doesn't sound less technical right now as I'm standing here saying it. But try to talk about what's the difference between, I keep picking on Jesse's district, what's the difference between Cleveland Road and Atlanta Highway and Mitchell Bridge? Like they are different. And if you start to think about, well, let's compare and contrast, everybody can do that. So that's what we want to do, is make it a very familiar and easy conversation and then try to pull value statements and expectations for the future out of that so that it's not so technical about RS and RM and I and all that, We'll get there. We'll get there.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that we're going to have a serious conversation about increasing density in certain areas. I mean, we're a growing community, and we've got to put people somewhere. But we've seen the negative effect of that when you have it all in one area, where all our density has gone downtown. Our in-town neighborhoods are overwhelmed with students. There's all these high-rises going up that, people are not in love with. I feel like we need to kind of abandon that broad brush approach to zoning in some way. You look at our zoning map and there's just like vast swaths of this color and that color. And I know that spot zoning is like a bad word, but I think that it's something that we need to look at, to consider, like some kind of policy where, yes, it's okay to put some small commercial project in the middle of or at the edge of this neighborhood, because it will give those folks somewhere to go to buy a gallon of milk. Or, I live in a neighborhood, and that's how neighborhoods grew up in the old days before cars. Was you had your corner store, you had your corner cafe, you had your corner pub, and you had homes as well as small apartments and duplexes. There was like diversity in your neighborhood, and you do still see that in older neighborhoods like Boulevard and Cobham and Hancock and East Athens. It's been degraded in places like Hancock and East Athens because of that multifamily zoning that has targeted that neighborhood for student housing almost exclusively, and that student housing has driven out the traditional residents of those neighborhoods, and the ones that are left are struggling because they're living next to student party houses and cars parked all over their place and trash cans in front of their houses. So I really think we need to kind of reconsider that RM1 zoning in these neighborhoods that were traditionally single family and come up with, maybe it's something akin to special use permits or something like that, that will allow us to shoehorn a little bit of density in here and there where it is appropriate, where the lot size is appropriate, where the parking is available, where you're not going to incentivize demolition, which the last thing we want to do is see some of these quaint historic neighborhoods demolished for big, ugly quadplexes, which we're seeing plenty of.
I think that's why we want an in-depth chance to talk with you, to get into those types of issues and talk them through, because I think Right now, we've got 200 beds per acre downtown, which came out of our future land use, and then it drops to 24 beds per acre. The zone that allows for 50 beds per acre isn't really on the map.
No, it's
So
not.
what we're suggesting with this next iteration, we were super successful with that in '99 and maybe too successful. So now it's time to recalibrate and allow for density to occur in a much more incremental way and do it contextually in an appropriate way throughout the community where we have the services to support it. So that's a good topic for us to dive into when we have more time.
I mean, I also feel like we could, incentivize some of that student housing develop in other parts where campus meets the community. It's all going downtown right now, and campus is a really big place with a really huge perimeter. And quite frankly, there aren't even a lot of classroom buildings on this north end of campus where all that housing development is going. It's all about the downtown that is attracting those students to want to live there.
Commissioner Taylor, did you have your hand up?
Oh,
Okay. Commissioner Wright.
Thank you for this, and I look forward to did you say you want to have small one-on-ones for the more in-depth stuff?
I mean, we're open to any kind of format that's appropriate.
Okay.
But we do want you to feel comfortable to just talk through the things that concern you.
All right.
And then talk about the process on how we're going to get to those concerns. We want you to be comfortable with this process because we need to be advocates for the process.
Right, okay, good. Because I also need to get caught up, I'm overdue to also meet with historic district learning that I need, with that being a new part of my district.
Sure.
In
Sure.
7 different forms. But I think that's going to help me in understanding the character areas that you're talking about, because that would be what I call an extreme version of character areas, but recognizing what's there and what to keep in there. But some of the things that stand out to me would be us talking about how having a residential tree ordinance, how does that fit into this, or if that's another topic as far as keeping some of the looks of our neighborhoods. The septic tank maintenance assistance, so that we can avoid condemnation for the multitude of properties that we have with the aging septic tanks. I think that, again, getting to the most affordable houses or dwellings are what's already there. And also, while we're having the public input, being able to educate at the same time, because I'm having a hard time explaining to people how a single-family zone can then now have a new family in an accessory dwelling in the back. So those are the kind of things I can learn from you, but I think as the public forum has, that we can make it an educational so that then the input can come in educated.
Yes. We want to demystify those things, and that's part of those walks. We have examples. Everything I've talked about tonight that would be a new and bold policy for residential, we've got them.
Yeah.
They exist in town. So to go stand on the curb or the sidewalk and take a look and see, well, that's what that is, either demystifies it, make you comfortable with it, or it's an illustration of exactly what you don't want.
Right.
And that's the kind of conversation we want to be having.
Right, and then with that being said, you would be able to capture a neighborhood and identify the density variety that's already there. If there's already 4 duplexes on that street, does it need more? Or a street that doesn't have any of the diverse options or the missing middle options, being able to identify, I don't know if that's even possible, but those are the kind of things we can talk about, right? And then also educate, so that when those dates get solidified, we can start helping with that outreach in newsletters and stuff like that.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, this is good.
Commissioner Fisher? Commissioner Davenport, I think I saw your hand again.
I did. I just have another question again about the shared septic. I Googled it. So that would be for newest neighborhoods or existing neighborhoods or a combination of both?
It's an idea.
Okay.
And so when we have those kinds of ideas, it's always, as planners, that's fun for us. It's hard work for other people. So the health department has to be okay with that. There are state standards on those that we have to navigate. Our public utilities department has to be okay with that. In some communities where there's shared septic, it's seen as a benefit because it provides an opportunity to tie on in the future, because things have been done in a way that's a central point of connection by sharing. that septic system. In other communities, it's tough because the soils aren't great, and we don't want to take that on because it's more of a liability than it was a help. So we've just got to be really careful, but that was just another illustration of a possible policy outcome that could help achieve some goals that right now is very difficult to do any kind of density in our unsewered areas. And I don't even want to call it density. I mean, it would be a third of an acre you can't do unless you have sewer. It's not very dense.
Because I was just thinking of that in lieu of tiny homes, like maybe in the future having that discussion. But I look forward to those one-on-ones and this long, lengthy discussion with the community.
Okay, thank you. I think Manager William wants to say something.
Well, I was going to say, Commissioner Davenport, good idea about, the one-pager, so to speak, but as Bruce mentioned, there'll be a two-pager memo coming your way, just sort of laying out the timeline, the purpose of it, and if you want to give us any feedback about, translating that for your constituents, we can try and prepare some messaging along those ways.
So the website is really awesome. Is there a one-pager for like the definitions of the different
Well,
type of zones?
in this memo that planning is preparing, there are definitions of some of these terms, key terms.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wait.
Oh,
Wait. Oh, yeah. Gotta be fair, Mike. Gotta be fair, Mike.
Okay, next.
Ready for football season.
Next step up, we got stormwater, is that right? Stormwater. Oh.
You said you were going to help me. I'm just going to sit and watch you help me. I think this goes on this side. Can you make it go over there? Oh, yeah, shift. Yeah, it's right back. Perfect. Okay, do we need anything else?
Good foot, I kick you.
Perfect. Well, good evening. Are we ready to go?
Yeah, are you ready?
I believe I am.
Let's go.
Good evening. I am Todd Stevenson, and I am privileged to serve as the Stormwater Division Administrator in Transportation and Public Works. Where we are headed this evening is stormwater financial planning. To set that up, it's important to highlight how the fee originated 19 years ago, some of the pivotal decisions that have been made by Mayor and Commission along the way, and the public outreach and study that has been conducted in recent years to help us look forward. With the understanding, and it's hard for me to believe, but with the understanding that not everyone may be as fascinated by stormwater history as I am, I've tried to make this as interesting as I possibly can. 3 themes will emerge: clean and cool water in our streams and rivers, the need for a safe and resilient community, and an equitable source of funding that is as low as reasonably possible. The world I grew up in was one of rapid suburban development. Common stormwater standards were all about getting rid of stormwater and associated pollutants as quickly as possible. This created vulnerabilities, many of which remain with us today. Someone I used to work with called these evergreen problems. That's because they never seem to go away. They cause endless frustration. One problem that was obvious and that people were complaining about was muddy runoff from construction sites. That led to the Georgia Erosion and Sedimentation Act in 1975. The Federal Water Quality Act designated local communities as being responsible for clean water and safer, more resilient communities. I personally believe that's just the way it should be. It took until 2003 for these requirements to take effect here in Athens-Clarke County. So there was a good amount of lead time to prepare. There has been no federal or state funding for implementation. It's been entirely up to us. There needed to be a consistent, stable, equitable source of funding. You'll notice something on this slide called the Area-Wide Stormwater Master Plan. That was the first attempt I'm aware of to develop a comprehensive stormwater capital program here in Athens-Clarke County. So while we were getting ready for the Clean Water Act, we were also looking into our stormwater capital needs. A little noticed part of that master plan was a section that included most of the pipes that later ended up on our live stream replacement list. In 2003, Mayor and Commission approved a 3-tiered stormwater funding strategy. The fee, which was not yet in place, would pay for our Clean Water Act responsibilities, our stormwater management program. The purpose of this multi-layered strategy was to keep the fee low. SPLOST would take care of stormwater capital. Land development fees were for our plan reviews and our project inspections that we do on all new development. The land development fees have recently been increased. For a while, SPLOST kept up with stormwater capital needs. Lately, there has been a lot of competition for SPLOST and T-SPLOST dollars. Another way to keep the fee low was to focus on our public responsibilities. Everyone pays for our clean water program, not just taxable entities, and everyone benefits. It was well known at that time that there were a host of drainage issues on private properties. For the most part, those solutions were left for private investments. That helped keep the fee low. The fee rate structure has not changed in Athens-Clarke County since the fee's inception here in 2005. When we talk about extent and level of service, we distinguish between public and private responsibilities. A couple of issues are considered to be quasi-public. Driveway pipes are generally privately installed and maintained, but they are also located in the public right-of-way. For the roadside drainage to work properly, driveway pipes need to be functional. Some communities provide assistance in keeping these pipes open. The Stormwater Advisory Committee has considered a couple of options in which limited driveway pipe maintenance is offered. The zone of influence is a prescribed area downstream of pipe outlets. The Stormwater Advisory Committee has considered options in which limited assistance is provided to stabilize erosion in the zone of influence. One such option is what we are calling the ROCK program. This would allow for Athens-Clarke County to provide rock riprap in certain cases, with the property owner being responsible for placing this material. Athens-Clarke County could fund all of the private responsibilities. That's an option the Stormwater Advisory Committee looked at, along with several others that will be presented here this evening. Eroding stream banks are common in Athens-Clarke County. We frequently hear about trees falling down next to creeks. This is partly a natural process, but is accelerated by development that happened without sound stormwater management, which translates to about the year 2005 in Athens-Clarke County. So most development here happened before what I'm calling sound stormwater management practices were in place. If a ROCK program were set up, some single-family residential property owners would likely take advantage of it to help stabilize stream banks. This creek happens to be in my yard. One thing I've noticed on hot days, next to the creek seems to be the coolest space in the yard. If water is not cool, fish and other aquatic life suffer. Now, actually, I was reminded that that's not completely true. I was just reminded of this. Brain-eating amoebas do like warm water. So, cool water, warm water. Mayor and Commission made a series of crucial decisions in 2003 and 2004 that substantially moved our stormwater management program forward. The original Stormwater Advisory Committee authorized by Mayor and Commission was a combined staff and resident committee. They made recommendations on a range of topics, from the fee to the specific elements of our stormwater management program. One issue I want to highlight that the committee spent a lot of time on and that was ultimately decided by Mayor and Commission was riparian buffers. These are buffer zones next to streams and rivers, and Bruce mentioned that in his presentation. At the time, this was a tough decision. It has really strengthened our resiliency. It has helped keep water quality from degrading. In some cases, it's prevented houses from being built in flood-prone and eroding areas. Some of the coolest places in Athens-Clarke County on hot summer afternoons are in natural and stream river buffers with mature trees. This was a decision made by Mayor and Commission that will continue to yield real benefits into the indefinite future, forever. I wasn't here at the time this was done, but people have heard me say this before. This is one of my favorite Mayor and Commission decisions of all time. The warmer it gets, and the more extreme weather we see, the more prescient this decision becomes. Here's another example of really good foresight. When Mayor Commission set up the stormwater utility in 2004, there were only 6 here in Georgia. Now there are close to 70. That number continues to grow. The original Stormwater Advisory Committee thought a stormwater utility was a good idea. The Mayor and Commission favored it as well. The current Stormwater Advisory Committee also supports it. When we ask residents here in Athens-Clarke County, the overwhelming majority say that owners of tax-exempt parcels should pay their fair share. That points us to the fee. So this is what we are doing, working towards cleaner, cooler streams and improved resilience to storms. In 2004, our stormwater management program was adopted by Mayor and Commission. It consists of all of these things. A crucial aspect of this is that it's ongoing. It never ends. It requires vigilance. It requires dedicated employees and community buy-in. It requires leadership. We've had all of these things here in Athens-Clarke County. By 2017, the stormwater utility had been around for 12 years. It was past time for a checkup. We'll see on the next slide that this ultimately led to Mayor and Commission deciding to start a new Stormwater Advisory Committee. To provide assistance with financial planning, Mayor and Commission awarded a contract to Stantec. They generated 2 technical memos that were accepted by Mayor and Commission. Stantec continues to provide financial guidance. Mayor and Commission also directed staff at that time to do additional public outreach, which we did in 2019. Part of that outreach was an insert in the water bill. Meetings were held across the county. We sometimes also include inserts in the stormwater bill. We're constantly doing outreach. In early 2018, Mayor and Commission first adopted the live stream replacement program. This is bringing us close to where we are now. We've been replacing failing stormwater pipes as funding becomes available. This is how we came to the current Stormwater Advisory Committee. What Stormwater Advisory Committee members saw in January, and what we've all seen many times now, is that the pipes that have been identified as failing on the live stream replacement list are, in fact, falling apart. We often hear the phrase crumbling infrastructure. To find it, we don't have far to go. For years now, we've been trying to work our way out of what we've been calling the capital deficit. One of the options the Stormwater Advisory Committee considered and ended up supporting includes sustainable life cycle funding for capital. This would allow us to plan for pipe replacements prior to pipe failures. This would minimize community vulnerability. It would improve our resiliency, and it would allow us to keep Clean Water Act compliance on track as well. With this last photo, we see exposed utilities. We know we had to close down not only traffic, but water mains as well on some of these roads earlier this year. Something a Stormwater Advisory Committee member noted was that tons of dirt can wash away as a result of these failures. It's much better to plan for infrastructure proactively. So we're ready for the financial planning side of this. As a preface to that part of this, you will see an option that the Stormwater Advisory Committee has not yet seen. Some of the early detention basins were installed in people's backyards instead of being on a separate parcel maintained by the homeowners association. So mowing and other vegetative maintenance by the property owner is fine, but the financial burden of an expensive repair to the outlet control structure can be excessive for just one homeowner. So we've created an option, we're calling it 3B, that you will see whereby the outlet control structure maintenance for that small subset of private detention basins would be taken on by Athens-Clarke County. And the Stormwater Advisory Committee will have a chance to look at that option next week. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Bill Lieberts with Stantec to explore financial planning. Thank you, Bill.
All right, we have just a few slides to give you the results. I won't burden you with the mechanics and all the stuff that we did, but I think that just a few slides will put it into context. It's just a short agenda at this point. We'll kind of talk about the scenarios, talk about the financial modeling for just a moment, give you the output, and then provide a little bit of perspective, a little benchmarking perspective of other communities in Georgia. Probably the most significant and least interesting part of what I do is trying to understand the spending, the revenue requirements. What is it that your folks are doing and why? Because we need to understand it in order to model it. We need to model it so that we can help you look ahead. You want to see ahead 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. We need to get a sense of the activities, of how your crews are doing what with what equipment and what the intent is. So there's a fair amount of digging that has to happen. And then we build what comes out as a rather simple financial model at the end that you can then use to answer the question, what if we do this? What if we do that? What if we do a little more this way or that way or the other? Revenue projections are contingent on the projections of growth, population growth, assuming the same rate structure with whatever change would be appropriate. And then we'll have some kind of metric. The question is, at the end of a 10-year period, do you have enough money in the bank? Did everything fail? Were you able to fund all this stuff? So it ultimately is really kind of super simple. Here are the 5 options, numbered conveniently 1 through 4, and I'll just describe them briefly. The option number 1 is the current level of service, and level of service is what you're doing, is how much you're doing. We'll also say in stormwater a lot, extent of service, that's sort of how far you go or where you go, but the same level of service. It continues what you've done before, and it continues the rate that hasn't been changed since 2005. And I want to make a point of that because if you can imagine working with the same exact budget, the same rate coming in that you were dealing with when you were running your household or your business in 2005, you might think that it would be about 56% less spending power. And that's what your folks are dealing with. So that's kind of option 1. But it looks forward, and at least it would, with option 1, start capturing inflation in the future. So we'll have some modest increases to at least keep you from going underwater. 2 then is an enhanced level of service, an increase in about $300,000 a year, getting to some of the driveway cleaning, the rock that Todd mentioned. And then 3A and 3B get to a more what you might call sustainable or infrastructure-driven asset management, keep everything together level, 3A and 3B, about $1 million more a year for capital maintenance on 3A, and then a modest increase, the 3B, is those the outlet control structures, so the places where your flow goes onto private property where it just used to be developed that way, so pulling that in. And then 4 is a bigger step up. 4 then is another $5 million a year to go to the whole, basically to do everything. So you've got a pretty significant range, and on purpose it's a wide range so you can see the implications from one end to the other. Now this is small, and I apologize, but I'll point you to the stuff that I think will make it pretty simple. This is option number 1, and I wonder if I don't have a cursor. That very top blue row is the annual percentage increase in the rate. And if you can see that option 1 is a level 2% a year forever. It's just simple. It's 2% a year. It goes on for 10 years. And then look out to the very far right. that's 19%. Can we see, oh, look, wait, can you see it? Oh, they can't see it up there. All right, but that top right number, 19%, let's call that 20%. So over a 10-year period, if you want to kind of do what you're doing now, a cumulative increase of 20%, 10 times 2%, I guess you would think it would compound to a little more, but whatever, it's in that ballpark. The other two things, look in the next two blue rows. I've got a monthly stormwater fee at $3.50, that's the current level, and then an annual number, an annual amount per year. I think the annual number is a pretty powerful one because we can understand it. So that annual number is about $42 a year for your typical home. If you take this plan, it'll only go up to $51 a year at the end of 10 years. So this is just holding your own, okay? All right. Two then is we're enhancing the level of service. We're doing a little bit more, adding the rock program, and you can see now across the top it starts at 3.25%. So it starts out higher, and then it's able to back off over time to 2.25%. With the cumulative number, that far right top number, instead of 20%, it's now 30% over the next decade. Okay, so you expand the little program, and expand the program a little bit, it's now 30% over 10 years. But again, look at the two middle blue rows. The annual number goes from $42 to $43, $44, and it inches its way up to $55 in another decade. The third option, now we're getting more sustainable. You're significantly, if you can see the tiny yellow stuff, you can see we're adding $1 million a year there in additional work. The cumulative number is 56% now, again, over 10 years. And so that typical bill is going to go from $42 to $52 right off the bat. It's a pretty big step in this, and you can fine tune the timing. But this gives you a sense of magnitude. From $40 to $50 a year, increasing to almost $70 a year over the decade. I'll hit the last two, and then you can see them all together, or whether we can talk about it together. 3B is a small increment. I won't belabor it, but we're about, that top right number is almost 60%, so just a little bit up, so a small increase to get to 3B. And that $42 bill goes to $52 just like before, and it again increases to about $70 again per year. So I want to talk about the annual number, but we're talking $70 a year, not $70 a month. And then the larger, the enhancing the extent of service is a pretty significant jump. That year one increase would be more than doubling, 140% increase to go from $350 to $840 per month, from about $42 a year to about $100 a year. The cumulative increase is a lot, 185%. So that's sort of capturing everything. That would be the far growth side from the far side of doing less. And then I think this gives you the perspective that'll really help from a statewide perspective. And I was thinking about it before coming up here. I think we're probably pretty typical in Georgia at this point in the way that we're doing stormwater. We may be a little behind the curve, a little bit. But when Athens-Clarke County got into this business almost 20 years ago, the $3.50 per month fee was probably at least 50% higher than what was typical. There were a lot of $1 a month fees and $2 a month fees. It was, because the utilities were appropriately modest. It was a new fee, everybody was wanting to be careful, and so you had to start somewhere, and Athens-Clarke County was pretty bold. But you can see then, there are a lot more, I think Todd said 6, now that's 70 or so, with probably an average fee in the $4 range at this point. All right, so that's the extent of what we need to prepare here, and then Todd, I'll hand it back to you to wrap up.
So, and the Stormwater Advisory Committee is recommending what is called option 3A on here. It was 3 when they looked at it because we didn't have a 3A and B. This policy statement, PW2, was accepted by Mayor and Commission back in 1992 to define extent of services on private property. One of the things we are hearing from Stormwater Advisory Committee members is the need for clarity regarding any services provided on private property. Without that, confusion and frustration results. So the Stormwater Advisory Committee has recommended a comprehensive rewrite of this policy. Something else we have heard from Stormwater Advisory Committee members is the need to be realistic on funding and our expectations. So deciding on the most appropriate level of service and associated funding level is a complex task. We could take care of everything, including the private responsibilities. It all comes down to funding and priorities. The Stormwater Advisory Committee has made a recommendation: clean, cool water, community resilience in the face of heavy rainstorms, and keeping the fee as low as reasonably possible. These are all achievable goals. We can do these things. Items 2 and 3 flow from whatever decision is made in item 1. Strengthening technical standards goes back to the idea of evergreen stormwater programs that are endlessly frustrating to everyone. It goes back to the idea that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Should we still be allowing evergreen problems to be created? We've been inspired in stormwater to start working on a residential rainscaping program. We've been inspired by the Stormwater Advisory Committee. It was just really fun to see how taking a deep dive with stormwater helped change people's perspective. Backyard drainage solutions can often take advantage of working with nature. We want to be proactive about growing that knowledge base and sharing information. Lastly, I want to commend Stormwater Advisory Committee members for doing their homework, for becoming informed, for challenging me with questions on ideas, and for their efforts in being part of the solution. Thank you.
I got you.
I was first.
I have a cohort of people here to help me answer questions, so I'm not going to stand up
I
here.
know. We're going to go with Commissioner Fisher.
First of all, thank you. I got several questions, and staff may be able to answer. First of all, how much money yearly do we raise on stormwater fees?
So from the fees that's assessed to the various ratepayers, it's on the order of $4 to $5 million.
It's a little over $4 million, correct?
Okay. And my second, I think I remember you, Manager Williams, talking at one time we passed a splosh. We had asked for monies from that, and the committee, the advisory committee, I think one of the things that they did was they didn't consider the amount that you all asked. So I'm asking, can we redirect splosh dollars to deal with our infrastructure? And I say this, and I believe that if we don't deal with this sooner, that we're gonna have some major problems down the road. So if there's a possibility for us to redirect splash dollars to really deal with our infrastructure, stormwater, and what we're dealing with now. One of the first things I dealt with as a commissioner, and Commissioner Who was with me, one of my subdivision got a serious problem with stormwater in their neighborhood, and that's in many neighborhoods. So I'm saying that to say the public needs to understand stormwater and infrastructure is not sexy, but it's an issue that we got to deal with. And if we don't, what we saw on Olympic Drive, Athena Drive, and other areas, we're gonna continue to have those with all the rain that we're constantly getting, how the weather is changing so much now. So, and I know I'm rambling, but I wanna know, could we refocus some of our splash dollars to deal with this infrastructure problem?
Well, if I might distinguish between the maintenance of the conveyance systems of the water from their origin to the river versus the capital replacement of infrastructure. So the current fee does not cover the capital replacement of infrastructure. It's maintenance only.
Okay.
But you're right, sir. So there are existing stormwater issues, and if y'all bear with me for a second, back in the early 2000s, the government did a stormwater master plan, a series of master plans that covered the entire county. And there's two really facets to stormwater management. One is with the velocity of it, the quantity of water that moves, and then the other is through the quality. through various SPLOST referenda, in the last 20 years, a good many of those historic flooding issues throughout the community, Baxter Drive, various neighborhoods, SPLOST funds were used to address long-standing issues. And I have to tell you, when I got here 10 years ago, and Public Works was one of my first departments, it really is quite amazing. With all the stormwater problems that communities across America and Georgia, and particularly one as much topography as we have, many of those major master plan projects have been accomplished. So, you're getting to a point where you can say, well, a lot of our flooding issues, now, we got bigger storms coming. There was plans to move more into the water quality projects. So there were two parts of those master plans. We got a lot of big projects done, but there's a lot more yet to do. All right, I'll just take a couple more minutes. In the meantime, we've had some failures because there are existing pipe, either put in by the government or put in by others that we inherited, a corrugated metal type material that really only has a short life cycle, about 25 years. A lot of that was put in the 80s and 90s, and now that's coming, and we've seen failures in the last 5 years, probably a couple dozen. We've spent several $1 million on that. Thankfully, there were some excess funds through the ratepayers that we were able to use in emergency fashion. In the meantime, the mayor and commission did, Commissioner Wright put $500,000 in the SPLOST 2020, and you further augmented some additional SPLOST funding, sir, as you've asked, that went towards some of these failed projects. In the T-SPLOST 2023, there were some additional funds put in there because these culverts that convey the water are under road, so that is necessarily a transportation project. So I say all that to say, yes, sir, we can use SPLOST funds to do that. That is and in fact, back in 2018, 2017 perhaps, when Drew Ressler was our Transportation and Public Works, when we started this notion of this live stream replacement program, all these culverts that need replacing, the then commission said, at the time we projected about a $22 million liability, and we said, well, how do y'all want to pay for that? Do you want it to burden the ratepayers, or do you want to try and augment it with SPLOST? Commission at the time said, let's take the $22 million and the extra $11 million, we'll do ratepayers extra $11 million on SPLOST, but that didn't get voted into the SPLOST. This is this Stormwater Advisory Committee for the first time in, almost 20 years to take a look at the rates. And then I've been with every one of y'all in somebody's yard about, can you fix this, or why is this, and so they really have taken an expansive view of all the different, possibilities of interventions. And then I think they've tried to put an eye towards, well, what could be affordable and not totally overwhelm people. So you're dead on, Commissioner Fisher. It will take SPLOST funds to help augment this. Those ratepayer funds, there's a little bit of capital money in there, but that may not fund the live stream replacement program. And I'd like to ask staff, if that last statement I made, how would you qualify that?
I always get nervous when we're talking about money, but Stephen, he loves it. He loves talking about
budgets. Right, so I think that's a really good point to make, that even the $1 million in options 3 there are about sustainable life cycle, right? So we've talked about that in a number of meetings. Going forward, what's a sustainable amount of money to go toward the average, paying for the average lifespan of these things? Does not talk about covering the existing deficit. So our live stream pipe replacement program is truly talking about those pipes that are about to fail. Those are the ones that are past that idea of sustainable rehab. These are the ones that we don't want another car in a sinkhole, right? So that liability right now is down to between $17 to $19 million, and it needs its own cash infusion to work on it. So that would be above and beyond this $1 million sustainable life cycle that we're talking about here.
And that's sort of my point. That's what I'm saying. We as the commission, again, you saw the answer, but you didn't answer. I want to know, assisting SPLOST money that we have, I'm not sure how much that is, could we use to go towards some of those resources to help what Stephen had just talked about? maybe not 17 million, but, some of that money to get these things done. Because I'm just a firm believer if we don't, if we don't take care of more and more roads gonna be under cars, and unfortunately, and I hope this never happens, somebody could lose their life. So we really need to take a hard look as a commission and really take a look at, those pipes that are failing, deal with those first and really get this thing under control. Because if we keep just kicking the can down the road, nothing's gonna happen. So I think we as a commission and the mayor need to take some type of action moving forward.
I think that's well said, and Stephen, the way I understand it, there's really kind of three capital needs. One is this $1 million that's just sort of to keep things going. Another separate is the live stream replacement program, which needs to deal with emergent issues, as y'all monitor the pipe. And a third is those yet to be done water quality projects, which those have sort of been suspended because lack of capital funding and the emergency nature of the live stream replacement. So there's just to make sure everybody understands, what the Citizens Advisory Group's recommending is just that sustainable capital. Y'all are trying to address some of the live stream replacement program with the SPLOST money. And then we have to discuss, what are the bigger aspirations of the community to complete the master plan as far as water quantity and quality projects in the county.
Yeah, I'd love to get back to master plan projects, right? And I think that if we didn't have the failing pipes on the roadways, that's the next SPLOST we'd be requesting as staff, right? As soon as we have our big deficit down, I think we would want to go right back to those. The reason we jumped to live stream, I think this is probably self-evident, but it's just the emergency of those failures compared to quantity and quality projects.
Thank you. No, I know. It's going to be Commissioner Hamby, Commissioner Wright, Commissioner Link. Nobody? Okay. Oh, y'all are over there. Y'all are over there. So, and then Commissioner Davenport.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor
Pro Tem. So, and Blaine alluded to this. I know he's been out there along with Todd and other folks. I appreciate coming out and looking at some various stormwater issues over the years. And since I've been a commissioner, stormwater has been the most difficult one to address and to deal with. And I think part of that, y'all expressed it here tonight, is what the expectations are for this fee when people are paying this fee, what that fee goes to, and what sort of level of service it does deliver. And and I've been on the side of the residents and the people I represent, and saying that I do think we could do more in addressing some of the stormwater, especially those that are obviously coming from the street that we're responsible for, and also when our stormwater management utilizes the creeks and stuff that go in. When we shove the water into the creeks and the creeks are eroding, then I think we're responsible for stabilizing those creek beds. So, and I know we do need to look at the level of service and the funding options. And I hope I know we'll probably have some comments and public input about this. But I do think also when you're talking about water quality, our stormwater at some point becomes a shared responsibility with our public utilities department. And it's not just a transportation issue, but it is a water quality issue as well. So there is that component of it, and I think we ought to start looking at it from those lenses, because, and I don't jump over here and choke me, but our water enterprise fund, has a lot of, and I know we use those for different water projects, but I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't use them to help with some of our stormwater projects as well, and prioritize them in that sort of fashion. The other thing I would say is this, in looking at the funding options here, I just want to make sure I'm clear. These are just averages, because people pay different rates based on the type of impervious surface or whatnot that they have. So these are just the average rates for people, not necessarily a flat fee for everybody across the board. So at any rate, I look forward to the discussion. I appreciate the Stormwater Committee work. I see one of the members here, I believe, that worked hard on this, and I just hope we can go and look at some of the options that you presented here and able to help residents on their property because they see it as what their fee is going for. So however we can do that. I've got a stormwater issue that I need to talk to you all about tomorrow, so.
Call me up.
And go from there, and I know Blaine's helping with one over in Glenwood for me, but anyway, that's all I've got to say tonight. Thank you.
Before our next commissioner, manager.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question. I'm sorry, Mayor. The other thing to think about too is one of the things that I've, and we've seen this in 5 Points and probably over in Boulevard, is when you have the infill and when you have single family being built, and that, creates some tension between neighbors and whatnot. So I don't know if there's a way where there's, when you have the infill, that is there some sort of review process that they go through to address the stormwater.
So I think maybe someday there will be. We're not there yet.
Why can't we do that? I mean, what's the problem?
Well, I just think it becomes an issue of funding is one, but also, is this really the direction we want to go? Single-family residential existing lots of record are exempt from a lot of stormwater regulations, and that's just the way it's been. Now, I've heard this from Commissioner Link many times before in the past, so this is the second time I've heard this from another commissioner. So yes, that's an issue that we would be happy to look at as directed. That's, yes.
So I think part of that's a value question, right, that Todd was saying. Is that the way that we want to move towards our development standards? But the other is truly a resource question.
Well, it does, when it can impact a lot of neighbors around there. So,
That's right.
so I think that is something I would be personally interested in exploring to see what resources are needed and what that would entail. And being part of the plans, I don't know how to manage it, and that's what, you
Of course, the
guys
idea
are there for.
of inspections, having inspection staff and review staff to be able to review those plans and inspect those sites.
Right. So, okay, thank you.
Before the next commissioner speaks, Manager Williams wants to respond.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Mike said. So another feature of all this, and you see Bill Ziebert's name up there, is a sustainable way to just incrementally raise the fund over time, and that's how public utilities is run, and it's anchored to, a capital plan, a funding plan, and so Mr. Ziebert's is the one that helped us with the public utilities, so we're grateful to have him here, and this is bringing some consistency of structure to this type of funding and planning. So I don't want that lost in the whole discussion.
Okay, I'm on this. It was.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn, and
Thank
then
you.
Melissa, and then Commissioner Davenport.
Okay.
Did I get them right?
Great. Yeah, I think so. Thank you for this, very informative, both sections of that as well. I see where you've come up with 3B. That makes sense. I do appreciate all the details, though, that are helping us compare those. I would like to support the concept of when that annual bill goes out, that you do have an informative educational flyer. The flyer, instead of relying on the water bill inserts, but when that annual stormwater bill goes out, that there's an informative, this is where your money's going to
For sure,
insert.
yes.
I think would be really
Yep.
helpful, because people respond, and that gives them a little bit of a back and forth thing, and you've got two sides of a page to put in there, or partial. And then I think that we all understand and have heard the complaints. So you've got the house that's downhill on the street, and I do believe that supporting a increase so that we can address that private property effect, that the other neighbors are able to be empathetic to their neighbor who's catching it all downhill. I think that that's going to be an easy thing for us to sell.
Yeah, and, I mentioned this residential rainscaping program. We'd love to get into the neighborhoods and just do a deep dive with people and kind of create stormwater ambassadors. again, based on the experience we've had with the Stormwater Advisory Committee, we think that would be a successful approach.
Yeah, I've seen some beautiful plantings, wildlife, where the university has their park and ride near our water reclamation plant. They've done a really good job. I mean, that's a grander version of it, but if we can help hardscape and softscape that, and this can go to that, that's going to help us with that. And then I guess my question is, what are the next steps? I didn't see that part. This is just information. We're not going to see anything coming back to. What's our next steps?
Yeah, so after tonight,
there we go. Sorry.
We will come back with an agenda in the September, October cycle.
Okay.
No, it's the next one. It's the August, September cycle, right? Yeah.
September vote cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
So it will outline, again, the differences in the level of service options. It will also happen after the next meeting of the Stormwater Advisory Committee, so they'll have a chance to ratify the new 3B, and bring in any comments that you brought up tonight as well. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, so I've got a long list of questions and comments, because I do think stormwater is sexy.
I was going to say that as well.
So one big question is the Federal Infrastructure Act. Are there any of those funds available for stuff like this?
We continue to try. So there's a culvert investment program that we've talked with the federal folks about. This past year, the criteria that they use is very narrow towards migrating fish patterns, and they had a very specific set of populations that they wanted that money to go toward in the first year. I hope that opens up and becomes bigger, and we'll look at some the Protect grant and some other resiliency related grants would be ones that we want to go after as well, and a lot of that comes down to, staff resources to go out for grants. We've got a few people, though, that are really learning very, very quickly how to do that, and hopefully we can put some of those resources to that.
Okay. And I was just looking at the option 3A and 3B, and the idea of the driveway culvert clean out. And there are plenty of people out there who do maintain their driveway culverts. I mean, I've been on my hands and knees with a metal pipe cramming out a driveway culvert in my family's property up north. It's not that difficult to maintain, but there are certainly folks that are unable to do it. And I'm wondering if there could be kind of an option where if you are unable to do it, you can pay the county to do it. And, so there is some funding that way where you're not, the county's not doing them all.
So that's not something we've considered. It's certainly an idea worth entertaining. So, yeah, I think it's not adding that much to the fee, but yeah, it's an option worth considering. We have to figure out how that would work.
And also the idea of this private infill development. I've definitely had infill homes in my district that have dumped a bunch of water into the backyards of neighbors, and it's been up to that neighbor to dig the trench and direct the water towards the street, and there was a house that recently got halfway washed away from some of that. So I would like, as we look at the land use plan and rewriting some of our zoning and development code, that maybe we come up with some ordinance language that requires that water to be directed towards the street and into the gutters. And as we talk about ADUs, accessory dwellings, I mean, those will start throwing some water into their neighbors' properties and can do some real damage. So these are things that we need to consider, like, on a broader level. And as far as the tree replanting, I would like us to figure out a way where we can replant some of these trees. I mean, a lot of these trees that are falling into these culverts are not appropriate species for that area. I mean, that pine tree probably shouldn't be there right next to that creek. So I don't know who we could work with to talk about replanting and maintaining those buffers with the appropriate shrubbery and trees that are going to last longer in that environment.
I just think trees are such an easy thing, and with things getting warmer, and it helps with stormwater, it helps with a host of things.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah.
yes, the whole emphasis on trees is definitely going to be
Well,
important going forward.
I
There's no
live
doubt about it.
across the street from a stream gully.
Yeah.
I face west over a stream gully, and I have yet to turn on an AC unit in my house this summer.
Wow. Oh, my God.
Granted, I've got like porches and stuff, but you know, you can feel that breeze coming over the gully from the west. And I mean, those little old houses were made to funnel that cool air that way.
Perfect.
Yeah, so with climate change and the recent weather patterns that we've had, we need to make stormwater sexy. So option 4 that you have on here, would that handle the concerns that Commissioner Link and Hamby has about infill housing?
No, that would be an ordinance change that would be required. I'm trying to remember what ordinance that is.
Okay.
Planners are here, they might, I don't know, but there's ordinances dealing with single-family residential lots of record, and I think it's exempted, maybe it's in Chapter 5.4, from a lot of the stormwater standards.
So the option 4, when you state that it deals with private, it
Yes.
will be the water runoff from the road going down to somebody's property.
Yeah, all the concerns that we hear from every week, we hear these concerns from property owners. You're well aware of that. All of you are well aware of that. Yep.
So just to clarify, that, you know, the end of our maintenance right now stops at the edge of the right-of-way, but that's not where the water stops, right? The conveyances go all the way to the streams and rivers. So this would be the county taking over maintenance even on private properties to convey that water successfully down to the streams and rivers.
My final, so I'm for option 3B, but you stated that the user group they are recommending the first option.
Only because they haven't seen 3B yet in a formal manner, and we hope that that's something that, so that's why we're coming to them next week to discuss that. So by the time the agenda comes out, our hope is that we'll have an adjusted recommended option.
Thank you.
I think it's Commissioner Myers and then Commissioner Hope.
So just two big level questions or comments. Someone emailed me recently about the stormwater, effects at Memorial Park. And in, I guess, our public survey, it talks about runoff from neighborhoods. And my thinking was, well, that was before we had stormwater planning in place. So lots of these things are from before we had it, and of course, we're not talking about infill, but as if, like Cedar Creek was all put together at the beginning, there would have needed to be, right now, there would need to be a stormwater plan, right? Right. Okay, so that's one, to clear that. And then the second one kind of follows up on what Commissioner Davenport was bringing up, and just the questioning of how we are incorporating increased extreme weather events into our planning for the future. You guys, on top of that? Is that in there? Are we anticipating? I mean, that kind of ties in with these.
That's
needs
really,
going down.
that is the question that everyone is asking themselves right now. And we see some states that say, hey, we don't know what it's going to, but we're going to plan for 20% more volume.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't taken that step yet. People tell us we're more strict with our standards here in Athens-Clarke County than some other jurisdictions. We try to follow the standards because we know how important they are, and they're important in the long term. And so that is what we're doing. But as far as the future goes, and knowing how much rainier it's going to be and all of that, that's been a tough one to plan for at this point. Yeah.
It's in the back of your head
Oh,
somewhere.
it's at the forefront, and in every stormwater conference that you go to, and all these climate conferences, yes, that's out there for sure.
And then the last point is sort of a very practical one, and Commissioner Wright mentioned the neighborhoods that are, the house that's down downstream in the neighborhood that you all came over and looked at one over in Cedar Creek. Which plan is that in? Like, which plan addresses that?
So that would be option 4 that deals with all of those issues and
It would be option 4?
correct.
It would not be in 3A or 3B?
No, but 3A and 3B.
And so maybe that ties in what, one thing for helpful right now
Yes.
is to see see some visual that we all can connect to for each of these levels, because
Yeah.
that fine print and the words don't mean as much
Correct.
to me. So the variations, it would be helpful for me knowing that.
The one thing that we have included that we don't have now in 3 is the ROC program, and we're basing that off of Gwinnett County because they have this. And what we would do is provide rock riprap in cases where there are erosion, like that eroding stream bank that we saw that's in my yard. And the property owner then would be able to, would be responsible for placing that to prevent the erosion. And we're looking at an option there that is not going to cost, that is not going to substantially increase the fee, and yet it's going to provide a service that people are asking for. If we get much beyond that, then we get beyond our existing staffing level, and we get a huge incremental cost because we're contracting things out. And that's why when we get to option 4, that's why it jumps up so much, because we know we would have to contract that out. That's a level of service that we cannot provide in-house, whereas we think with the ROC program, we could do that in-house. So we think that option 3, both of the option 3s are kind of the sweet spot that provides the most value, and that's what the Stormwater Advisory Committee is looking at as well.
Well, and if I might, Mayor Pro Tem, and Stephen, I want to ask you to clarify this for me. So, that option 4, that's an estimate of 5 million, and certainly you get into one project and you could totally swamp that, and other folks are wanting their creeks to be moved, or, so that is not, that's an estimate, and I want to give an example, because I think, Commissioner Myers, you asked the perfect question for y'all to understand, for staff to understand, for the homeowners to understand. So for instance, I'm going to say, I know off of Castalia, and this is important, y'all, and ties back to the future land use map. So we've had increasing density, we've had increasing infill, we've had increasing impervious surface. And so those pipe conveyance systems, pipes that were put into place, years ago they were sized at that time, and now we have more density and more runoff, arguably, from the climate change. And so, that Castalia replacement, okay, I'm going to say multi-million-dollar replacement, right? Would that come out of option 4, or is that part of that water quantity quality master planning that really is not even funded by any of this, any of the current SPLOST, but that would be an aspirational SPLOST in the future?
I would say the second, what you just said.
The aspirational SPLOST. Does that make sense?
It does, but you could also add, the water utility office as well.
Commissioner Hull was next.
No, he was using a street in my district as an example. Yeah, appreciate that.
And these are great questions. I just want to point out that sometimes it seems like it'd be easy, and I'm thinking that Castalia situation. Well, we just fixed the problem right here. But then you look at the next downstream property owner. What does that do to them? And you have to keep going downstream and downstream to the creek. And then what does it do to the creek? So these seemingly simple projects become quite complex and expensive.
Commissioner Hull?
Yeah, thanks. A handful of questions that I hope are very quick, like yes, no sort of answers. But I do hope that we'll do at least option 3B. I'm interested in learning more about option 4, if not right now, then maybe soon. I just think about what people in our community do expect, and the fact that it is a collective problem that the community faces that happens to fall on individual property owners or certain neighborhoods more than others, and people probably move into those places not realizing how this all works when they buy that property that's probably cheaper for a reason. And so we also think about how this affects probably more often lower income people. The first is, just help me understand why this fee can't be used to help us catch up on the live stream replacement program.
It could be.
So it absolutely
Okay.
could. It's
So why
just-
was that not included as like an option 5 or something?
So to do that, I'd say instead of $1 million a year, you'd want to do that plus a front-loaded or incremental $19 million. You know, so you could do that. That wasn't one we presented just because we felt like a cash infusion like SPLOST makes a lot of sense for a backlog, right, for a deficit, especially since the need is there now to fund that in the next couple of years, not over 10 years, if we can.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking because SPLOST and T-SPLOST are both pre-designated for the next few years of T-SPLOST and the next like 8 years with SPLOST, you know, in my mind, it makes sense to maybe have, in lieu of the existing option 4, like an option 5 or something that might put a little more money in to help us catch up on that, because it seems like we need everything we can get. I know that it was a lot of back and forth this year to like inject another $1 million into from our general fund monies, but even if we did that, we'd have to do that, it sounds like, for 17 years to catch up, so it seems like we need more.
Well, Commissioner Hull, if there was any interest in that, and I'm looking at Bill and staff, you know, it could be that you float a bond and then you use the utility revenues to repay it over 10, 15, 20 years. And that way you get your upfront infusion, but your ratepayers don't feel that jolt of, you know, immediate capital charge.
I'd be very interested in knowing that, and this gets back to, you know, when we've talked about these other bonds we're talking about getting and our bond rating, like this to me seems like an essential thing to maybe try to tackle perhaps with the bond.
And anticipating that question, we have a hidden slide up
Ooh,
here.
hidden
which-
slide. Oh, okay.
But we don't even know what it says.
So there are ways to upfront, you know, do a upfront bonding with this. But just remember, I think even this would be closer to that amount of money at the very beginning. So it looks like right at the beginning, we're adding that 10 million in. But that 10 million was supposed to be our annual sustainable life cycle cost, right? So it's still, if that 10 million goes toward today's deficit, tomorrow's deficit's still, you know, getting closer to due.
So with 3B, you could do how much would the bond be?
Did we put 10 million at the front on this one?
Is that, I don't see where you put.
Bill can probably.
And that it was just a quick example, but it does show, if you look at the bottom right, there's about 10, 11, $12 million, whatever that bar is. And so it definitely is empowering. When you have a capital expenditure, you can spread it over an appropriate lifespan. It's not your best, as Stephen was saying, it's not your best way to sort of catch up, because the catch-up need is already there. So a truly external source is more powerful for that kind of a thing. But for forward-looking assets that have, especially for your stuff that's more long-lived, it's definitely a strategy. And so in a way, it's a optimization routine. You know, you have Public Works work with finance, and we'll just do you can say, well, just do the most cost-effective thing, and it's very, very doable. A lot of stormwater stuff is bonded at this point.
Well, I guess I, for one, would be very interested in us looking at that option. Can I ask just, these are like hopefully very quick questions. It's more about the way this fee is structured, just to make sure I understand. I've read through the FAQ on our website, which is good. And, you know, my understanding is that the stormwater utility bills, as it says, are based on the amount of impervious surface that is present on the property. So my first question is there like a minimum fee or a maximum fee? Or is it just you pay a certain amount per acre of impervious surface? And
Yeah, it's based on the amount of impervious surface, and I believe if there is less than 300 square feet of impervious surface, then you don't get a bill.
Okay.
But that's kind of the minimum. There is no.
So if you own like a vacant lot that's forested, you're not getting a bill?
There is no bill for that.
And if
That's
you
correct.
own a parking lot that covers every inch, you're billed for every inch of your property?
Yes.
Okay. And then I see on there that we're using data from 2013, aerial imagery from 2013 to calculate impervious surface. I mean, is there?
Yes, so we
plan to update
we have been updating that data, and if we go to a new system, whenever we go to this, we do need to incorporate that updated data, that's for sure. That's something that Stantec advised in the second technical memo, and that's something we've been doing, yes, incorporating that updated impervious surface data.
Okay, so is there any additional action this commission needs to take to like fund that update getting completed, or is that just something that's going to happen anyway and we just need to wait for it to be completed?
I'm going to say maybe, but for the most part, we've done that. There may, in transitioning to a new billing system, there may need to be some funding, but I don't want to say that there definitely will be at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then are any properties exempted or discounted? I know there's like a discount if you've done certain improvements on your property, but like by default, is there any property type that's exempted or discounted, or everyone pays, even the nonprofits and the government-owned properties?
There is no property type that is defaulted. It just doesn't have to pay. It's based on the impervious surface.
So I mean, just, when we talk about, like, people are talking about like UGA paying their fair share, or nonprofits and churches, like, this is something.
That's correct. UGA does pay the fee.
Yeah. So along those lines, hearing that we're not doing this yet, this, I think, came up in a previous meeting, but there might be more a question for Judd. I mean, is there a legal feasibility of reduced rates for low-income households? So I'm thinking as like one option would be if you've qualified for the low-income homestead exemption, then you'd qualify for a lesser rate. Is that feasible legally?
That's something we can look at. I think there may be some communities who do that.
Okay. I mean, assuming colleagues are amenable, I'd be very interested in looking at that too. Like, in my view, a more aggressive fee structure to try to help us get in a sustainable place, thinking about climate change, making this worse and worse every year, is needed. But to avoid us further burdening the lowest income people in our community, maybe using this tax tool that we have on the books as a way of reducing rates for those folks. Maybe also in rental properties, like reducing rates on rental properties that have subsidized units or something. But so just food for thought. I guess maybe to not give you work that's unnecessary. If this is my idea no one agrees with, I don't know if anyone wants to just nod or shake their head, but I'd be interested in having that be part of our agenda item.
I'm definitely interested.
Okay.
We're good?
I have one quick question, and it's about the benchmarks and the price for the different counties. And I'm sure y'all done this, and if it's readily accessible, that'd be good. But if we're looking at this rate of whatever it is, the 438 or something, could you give us the benchmarks of what level of service those communities that fit within that category also provide?
We've looked at that, and we're providing the level of service that most other people are providing. Now, when you get around the edges, like the driveway pipes, there are some communities that do more than we do on driveway pipes, but for the most part, communities just don't have the funding to get out off of the right-of-way in private property and be dealing with all of those issues. We have looked at that. That was something I put together and presented a while ago, and we can provide that information
I
again.
thought I've seen it before,
Yes.
so I don't.
Yeah.
So if you got a handy,
Yeah.
I'd be
Yeah.
interested, but
Yeah.
don't go
For
through any
sure.
trouble if you don't.
Yeah.
So. I'd be interested in the bonding. Or the,
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? And somebody seconded? Did you second?
Second.
It's been mentioned second. Good night.
Good night.